Peace, everybody. Welcome to the Imperial 80s. I'm Tume. How are you doing, man?
Doing all right, making it happen, but eh, I'm happy to be here. To talk about this very, very, very interesting childhood movie here
Yeah,
that I'm sure everybody has seen. I'm playing. I don't know. We'll see.
that's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, so
Yeah.
like, I'd love for people in the chat to kind of just offer also like, have you seen it? How many times?
Yeah.
And like one of the things that we were talking about before we got started is like, what was it? If this movie was a movie you watched a bunch of times, like what was it about the movie that made it a staple for you?
Yeah.
Um, so everybody make sure to like, share the video, get it to others, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, support the Imperial 80s on Patreon. I promise we're gonna get back to some bonus content soon.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll be out of
but
work in
any
about a month, so I'll have more time.
yeah. Um, but anyway, yeah, so do that. And yeah, so I mean, we could start off. Where do you want to start them to? Maybe just with childhood stuff
Yeah,
with
I
this
mean, we can
movie?
start with childhood, and then go into, maybe a bit of like seeing it again, what it brung up. And yeah, definitely in the comments, people who definitely grew up in the 80s, I'd be curious if it was like a film that was big for you. And then even folks who weren't, like, 'cause I'm also very curious, like, how much movie this mileage has had for like, people who are like grew up after 85 or after into the 90s. If we have any people who watch it who are born after the 80s, I'd be curious, like, the mileage it's had. Um, but for me, like, look, there's a way that I have to say I don't remember a world before the Goonies because it was out when I was 5. I do kind of remember the first time I saw it a little bit, but like, I was so young, and I watched it a ton. Like, I watched it like consistently. It was like one of the, I think, first VHSs we had at my house, and I think also because my parents were into me seeing it, like, they liked me seeing it, so it's like they were into, like, the kind of adventure kids thing. They were like, "This is fine, my son can watch this, and, you know, it won't cause any harm," though we'll talk about some of the wild coding in this movie, very, very soon. The other thing, though, I think if I had to, like, do some kind of, like, dime store psychoanalysis on my own self, thinking about it, I do think there was a fascination of me being a city kid and thinking how suburban kids operated, which for me, suburban kids always meant white kids, right? And these white kids, while in this kind of moment of desperation because they're losing their, property, um, are having this like amazing time that I was like probably jealous of, and it's like, oh, it's definitely like, why do the white kids get to have all the fun, like type of vibe, right? So, I probably had that fantasy of wanting to be a Goonie. I mean, remember, there is no black Goonies, which is like fine. I'm not doing that kind of thing, but there is no black people in the movie, so there was no like that kind of like identification or like entrance, I could make into the film. um, so yeah, like it was, and I think I watched it. I probably watched it all up in like heavily until but maybe my preteen or teen years. No, it definitely didn't go into my early teens. By like 13, I probably would be out of it. But I watched it a ton. And then honestly, I haven't seen it much at all in a long time. When I watched it this weekend, I was reminded how much I did see it because I still could remember every scene. Like, it wasn't a thing that I could like recall and tell you the plot, how it moves. But as I was watching it in sequence, I could get every single thing. Like, every line, every moment was like super familiar. Um, but yeah, like, I've had no connection to it since then. And like, it's like one of those like Hollywood artifacts. Um, but watching it this time, I mean, I don't want to get too much into it, but I also can see what it's done in terms of how people think of like, and I'm gonna put these in like, quotations like ethnicities, groupings, outcast groups, people to watch out for, and like straight up, like how much of that coding I saw get transferred into even my own existence when I was a teenager, and how we looked at other groups. And it's interesting in that kind of way to watch it again and to see all that stuff kind of like leveled out. Um, yeah, so I want to get more specific. I'm being very broad. We'll get into it. But yeah, like that's kind of my thoughts around this movie. But like the one thing I will say, like all the like the Goonie like fanfare that exists, even for people who got older. I just never followed any of that. Like when I was a kid, I was definitely a diehard of the movie because I liked watching it. But like the like 25, 35-year old, like this I'm a Goonie type stuff that I've seen people do, like the kind of nerd culture stuff. I've always been very like, okay, y'all can have that all for y'all, but that's not a thing for me. I definitely have not been into that kind of fanfare.
Yeah. I mean, this one's kind of funny for me because I can't really, I was saying this to before we started, like, I can't really explain why it wasn't a bigger deal for me personally growing up. Because it seems like it should have all the kind of elements of a lot of movies that I really loved. Like, I was a huge fan of movies like The Sandlot. It's set in Astoria, Oregon. A movie that I love much more about from Astoria, Oregon is Kindergarten Cop. um, and still love more than this movie. But um, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Another one too set in Oregon is Stand By Me, which like we will do soon. And that one actually I watched much more than this film. um, so I don't really know. I maybe I could chalk it up a little bit that I just kind of hate everything Steven Spielberg has ever done. Like there's like very little in the Steven Spielberg kind of universe that I can really get behind. But just to back up about like that's kind of me personally. But I would just say like it was extremely popular, like and popular among my friend groups in Oregon. And there's a lot within it as we get into it that is very much how like Oregon kids in the 80s lived their lives. Like I genuinely think it sort of captures um on some degree an aspect of that. And part of that also 80s and 90s I would say. And part of that also could be that it created in certain ways like you know but I don't think so. I think it actually is just certain things about what did we have in terms of transportation? We had bikes or we had walking, right? And you had a Oregon is a big state that doesn't have a whole lot of people in it, but has very interesting geographical and geological, kind of environment to basically go out and play with in your friends and not even though a lot of it is private property, right? Like there's not a lot of people to actually police what you do as young kids growing up in that period. There's also just uh to that point, there were not very many police in Oregon, right? And that's like there still are not as many as a lot of other states, but they're certainly in the 80s like you just if you saw a police officer like that was like an event for the day. And so that's something else to talk about. I mean there's a lot I think that we can unpack as we go through this movie about Oregon as a state, as founded as a white utopia, with a deep settler colonial past, right? And kind of the role that you know white settlers in Oregon sort of play, and then like sort of what that leaves to their kids in terms of fantasies and practices and all these kind of things. But also even to the question of the ethnic and diversity slash lack thereof in the film, that actually, other than the fact as I mentioned to you before that like there are very few Jewish people in Oregon, especially outside of Portland. um that somewhat this like that part rings true to some extent, despite the fact that obviously Ke Huy Quan's character is like a very significant, like super stereotypical, right, representation. Although Steven yesterday, or not yesterday, but as we were doing this, Steven Pelliser in the chat had put, this was the closest, this was like the best, the peak Asian representation in the 80s, right? So, I mean, that's an interesting thing to kind of unpack as well. My youngest got into Short Circuit, which is another one that has like a very like prominent, in that case, I think Indian, right? Asian representation is like a similar kind of similar representation. But we could talk about that as we go through the film, of course. But yeah, I mean, my friends, like, it was definitely something that was referenced a lot. Lines were used, calling yourself the Goonies, like, as you're doing something, referencing the Goonies, like it had that. It was obviously a huge movie, as we'll get into as we talk about the people behind it. It had a massive cachet of like kind of Hollywood clout behind the promotion of this film, which I think makes a lot of the reason why it's so big. And I also think that it's been helped by, I know you don't watch this series, but like things like Stranger Things, because they're like very heavily drawing upon the kind of groundwork laid by the Goonies, right? To then add in like a deeper kind of horror element. This film obviously is not, it's very very kid friendly, kind of scariness that's involved. It's not that there isn't, some fear and some villains and this kind of thing, but like, it's pretty it's not like I wouldn't classify it in any way as like a horror film or something like that. Obviously, it's a kid's adventure film basically.
Yeah, and I think that's an important element because I think do we I don't think we've done a film. We haven't done a film like this, but there was something we brought up, I think, in one of the earlier, maybe we were doing like Three Amigos or something about these kinds of offshoots of adventure that's like kind of made in the 80s. This idea that other people will kind of enter the kind of like adventure or save the society kind of, thing. It won't just be the Rambos, the military men. It'll be the Ghostbusters, which I think we should do very soon. Or it'll be the Goonies, right? It'll be these kids or something like that. Or like, like comedians can save the day, right? So this is like the significant kid entry into what has been like reserved for white older white men in that kind of way, right? And in the 80s they really wanted to kind of diversify it only, I think, in kind of like genre, right? And then make sure to have one or two people of color sidekicks. So right, so you have, Winston in like the Ghostbusters, and you have Data in this movie, and so forth and so on. So you kind of like plop that in to kind of show that you're being conscious about like, ethnic diversity and things like that. Um and it's very conscious, right? And I think it's also like I was watching one of the featurettes, and Spielberg is speaking about the film like it's this and Richard Donner are speaking about this as this is like the most original concept, and they were talking about mainly because of who is being the adventurers. So in this one, because it's kids, right? And what Spielberg calls outcasts. He does say that very specifically, which I think is very interesting, and we'll get into that in a moment. Um, this becomes like a real big thing for the 80s to kind of have these new adventurers, but the same old tropes just redesign or redefine, or also taking the tropes from like, other genres. So like from like the teen genre and then adding it to the adventure genre and doing these mishmashes. Right. And yeah, and this is what you get, these big phenomenons. So yeah, I think we probably could start with some of the setup of the movie or like get into like the key players. Because it's interesting, like there's like these key players. One of them is Spielberg, who does the original story, and we'll talk about the directing in a minute too. That does get a bit more interesting. But the original story was made by Spielberg, but it was written by someone that actually I don't think we've mentioned yet here. By the screenplay was written by Chris Columbus, who is a name for I think really the 80s until now, right? I mean, he's a big name, you know. This is I think like his second or third screenplay. He was the writer for Gremlins. That's a big thing. I remember that before this. But remember he directs Home Alone later, right? This is Doubtfire. In the 90s, his directing career really. Oh, actually, his big 80s film is probably a movie we should do. It is Adventures in Babysitting. That's actually his big directorial debut after this. I think this probably gets him the ability to direct Adventures in Babysitting, if you're thinking. So he's one of the big people who he wrote this screenplay adapting from Spielberg's original story. I didn't study how much they were in contact, but kind of knowing Spielberg's way, I'm sure he had a lot of input on the script. Like that's just a Spielberg kind of thing to have that kind of heavy involvement, which we'll talk to about the directing as well. The director, the listed director, and I don't want to say he wasn't the director. We'll get into that. Is Richard Donner, who this is now the third Richard Donner movie we've done. He might be the Imperial 80s directing leader right now. This is the film that kind of reshapes his career, because many people maybe do know that he did a Superman movie, the sequel, which he got fired from, and it kind of screwed with his career. He did a couple of movies after, right?
He did the first one. He did the first one too.
Well, he did the first one, yeah, exactly, Superman. But the Superman 2 ended up being like a huge thing. It's like a huge legendary thing. The Richard Donner cut. There's all these things about it, right? You know, with him getting fired and all that. So the Goonies that kind of helped him. And honestly, I remember you were doing Lethal Weapon. The success of the Goonies is the reason why the studio was willing to take what was then seen as like a financial risk in Lethal Weapon. So this movie was like a really big thing for him. I mean, this movie made I think it was like a $20 million budget and made like $120 million. So it's like a huge financial success. So Donner, you know, so the directing thing is more interesting. Because in like the featurettes, they're very big to show Donner doing the directing, and I'm not saying he did it, but apparently in Sean Astin's book, which I've never read and I won't, Astin said that they pretty much co-directed the film. There's nothing to do against Sean Astin. I just have no interest. I don't want to read Sean Astin's book. My gosh, talk about not fun.
So you're saying Spielberg and Donner co-directed?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. I mean, he said that. He said that they definitely, like, there was like particular scenes. If I were to read the book, I think there's a specificity on the types of scenes. I think maybe my guess is Donner probably did a lot of the like more colloquial scenes, the hangout scenes or certain things like that, or maybe Spielberg did more of the like adventurer scenes. This is a guess though. That's probably it could be a guess to me. I could be totally off on this, but they definitely split, and that's what Astin has said. And no one has said Astin is wrong. In his book, so which would track to when we did Poltergeist, right, and kind of track with like Spielberg's kind of overall kind of, I would say heavy-handed way of being a producer, right, and creator. He's definitely one that needs to like consistently insert himself into everything. So it's an interesting thing. So like it is a Donner and Spielberg film, you know.
It's also,
go ahead.
Well, just to touch on the same point with Poltergeist, like the reason that he wasn't director of Poltergeist was because he was directing something else that year, and they don't allow you to like direct two films at the same time, studio stuff. And same thing here. At this time, he's directing the color fucking purple, which we do have to do at some point because I do think it's the greatest filmic war crime of the 1980s, if I have to say so myself. But
they gonna come for you. They gonna come for you.
I don't care. It's such a bad movie.
After another was bad. Woo! We in for one on the color purple, which I'm down to do. We have to get into that one. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. You know, it probably was that. But I feel like in this movie, they don't want to talk about it that much. Like, I find it like, I think this movie is like, you know, such a thing that they don't want to speak about. Going back to Donner, though, Donner said shooting this movie was like part fun and part hell because having to, and I get it, having to like, I guess it's like what? How many of them were under 18? I think almost all of them, because Kerri Green was probably like one of the older ones. She was 17. I don't know how old Josh Brolin was. Like, but you got these like 12 to 17-year-olds, 11, you know, that you have to kind of wrangle around to like shoot a movie. And like, there's like a featurette of him like doing stuff, and you just see him just like trying to direct the kids. And it's just like a wild thing. So like long shoot, like having like lots of stuff happening. And also for a lot of them, it was like their first movie. I mean, it's Sean Astin's first movie. And I mean like feature film. Some of them did like TV movies and things like that. But if, like first like feature length film, like Sean Astin, I didn't realize it was Josh Brolin's first movie. I actually did not realize that. Like this actually launched him. I mean, it didn't really launch him. It started his movie career. The thing about Josh Brolin that I think that kind of freaks everybody out is like I was telling my lady, I was like, you know, that's Josh Brolin. And she's like, who? What? Yeah. And then it's like, oh, Josh Brolin. I was like, yeah, exactly. Yes. No Country for Old Men. Yes. You know, and then I think people also forget that he's James Brolin's son. I think a lot of people don't make those connections that and people know of a certain age know who James Brolin is. He was like one of the big sex symbols of the 70s, you know, Amityville Horror and things like that. It's Kerri Green's first movie. I didn't realize that. I thought Lucas was before this. I didn't realize Lucas was after. And then Chef Cohen, who played Chunk, it's his first movie and one of his very few movies. He goes on to become one of the most successful Hollywood lawyers there is, which is like another interesting little side story about him. Yeah, then like for like, you know, a lot of the other ones, it was like their second movie. Corey Feldman is probably the most seasoned person by this moment. You know, like he's probably the person who did the most movies at this juncture. You know, of like the young people, right? And then you have like some of these, like, you know, a lot of these like character actors who are just very interesting. It's like a really eclectically interesting cast that we could kind of get into when we get into maybe the more of the characters. People like Robert Davi and, you know, the two Coreys. Yeah. Woo.
Corey Haim.
Yeah. And I heard Corey Haim, I think, was up for this movie, but Sean Astin got it. I think that might be an apocryphal story, but I think I heard that before. Yeah, and then like, so yeah, I mean, that's like it's like a launch pad film for many, and I mean big shoot, long shoot. I'd be curious, Jay. We can maybe we could get into Astoria, into like the area that it's shot in a little bit, or we could do it with the movie, like, because one of the interesting things is that it does, like, this is I think this might be like the first movie to like take place in Astoria. I think it is. No, isn't the
I don't
first?
think so.
Right.
I don't think so.
But it is maybe the most significant, like in a way that people would go to Astoria after this movie to visit, right? The Walsh's house become a landmark. People come and visit it and shit like that. And then, like Jay was saying, it becomes like a very thing, like Kindergarten Cop, many things. And I was saying to Jay, like, a lot of that has to do when in Hollywood, you know, Hollywood is all about regurgitating successes, quote unquote, right? So like if Astoria becomes like a stand-in place, right? So it becomes like a shorthand. So if you want to tell a story about good-natured middle-class people, right? you say, I'm going to set it in a place. I'm going to set it in Astoria, and then Goonies will pop in their head. Eventually, Kindergarten Cop will pop in their head. They'll get the shorthand of that, and it Astoria becomes this like ideal of like good American suburban middle class values, right? Because the film is definitely really coded in this idea of the corporate world destroying kind of middle America, right? And the people who are the suburban middle America, who are the salt of the earth, who are the good families, so forth and so on, right? And it's the corporate greed coming in, who are basically destroying these possibilities. And it's interesting in like the middle of the 80s, because it's what they also do with Poltergeist, right? It's like in the middle of the 80s, this is like the narrative they kind of want to push and focus, and who they're trying to key in as like the real centerpiece people that they want us to focus on, which like is consistent with like a lot of movies we've done. If you think about even something like trains, planes, and automobiles, right? Like all of this real focus of that kind of world of people, right, as like the kind of center. Granted, on like different levels, but they want us to focus
in
on
planes
their...
and trains and automobiles, they hate those people.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But then he has to realize at the end that, you know, through John Candy's character, that like, you know, they are good people though. You know what I'm saying? It's not a good calculus. Yeah. It's bad. Even this is really bad. But like it's like the way their kind of chaotic mentality goes. It's very strange.
Yeah. I mean, one like quick point. I mean, I don't think actually suburban is quite the right term.
No.
It's really small town, right? And the distinction would be
small. You're right.
Yeah, the distinction, just for folks in the audience, I'm not, trying to split hairs, but the distinction would be that suburban implies that you're like, so suburban, I would think more of the John Hughes universe, right? Of like these areas right outside of Chicago that have these like wealthy people that like live in these suburban enclaves that are they're close enough to the city to go into it and all of that, but they have their own lives outside.
Pause. So would was it Todd, who's the guy who the rich kid and his dad, would they be suburban in your thoughts?
I don't think so, because they still live in Astoria. So like Astoria is like almost 2 hours from Portland. It's like an hour and 30 hour and 45 minutes or so. So it really, like, the people who live there are not commuting to Portland on a regular basis, right? So like that's kind of the distinction. So it's, and I say that just because I grew up in an area where the classifications around this get interesting, because there's like a big town to some extent, but it's not a city either, right? And so then like, so you can use suburban as a shorthand of like, not quite urban, right? But like I think in the case of Astoria or a lot of other parts of the country, it's actually more accurate to say small town, just because it's like they might have 20, they might have 15, they might have 40,000 people. It's really not big enough for us to talk about it as like urban or city life, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, it's not something I want to weigh in heavily, but I do think there is a distinction between, like an important distinction actually, between what suburban life is like and what small town life is like, because there's like, you don't have in a small town access to major cities, and this gives you a different form of like, especially in the 80s without the internet and everything else, like your life is actually, I think, qualitatively different in certain ways than suburban life is.
Right. So that's interesting. It's good to get like, is how it kind of codes to me. Not being from there, because like one of the things that I was looking at the Walsh's house, I was like, their house is nice and their house is big and they got a lot of shit. I know he worked all this time to get his good tires, but I was always like, Oh man, they're much more well off than I ever was. So they have much more access to things. So it's like the different stratifications of those things and how they kind of like visually code to you. But no, I agree. Like when you look at them as compared to like the Breakfast Club, it's a
Right.
totally different, or Ferris Bueller or any of those things. It is a totally different coding too. Same, yeah.
And like, to go back to another Spielberg, to talk about Poltergeist for a second, like that's closer to suburban, even though it might be like distant from, I don't know whether it
Mm-hmm.
was supposed to be close to Los Angeles or whatever, but like, because they're building this like community intentionally with all these houses that look the fucking same, right? That
Yeah,
like, and the idea is that most of these people are going to be commuting out of this area to work, right? So that's part of it as well. Is like if you live in a small town, you are figuring out a way to subsist within the local economy usually, right? And I think
yeah.
that's also important for this idea of sort of the goondocks, right? And you're right in terms of the house is a nice house, right? And that probably would have been the case, like because for a lot of things, it just wasn't in that era and before it wasn't very expensive to build a house, right? Or to have one built. And the land wasn't very expensive, right? All attached to settler colonialism, right? Like there's certain ways that people are incentivized to move to these places, to take up the space and so on. But the rub of that, right, of that cheap housing is
Mm,
also that there's not a lot of economic opportunity, right? And so this
mm,
this notion also that like people's ability to keep their house and the potential for it to be sold out or bought up by something else, I think is a real phenomenon to some degree. Now, Astoria, yeah. So Astoria is a small town. Somebody, in the chat, Jenny had said that it was growing up in Portland, it was the boonies to me as a kid. And that's, yeah, I mean, frankly, like if you grew up in Portland, unless you're talking about like, again, the suburbs, which would be like Lake Oswego, Tiger, towns like that, everything in the state is probably the boonies to you. I grew up in the boonies for sure. But Astoria is weird in some sense because, like, yeah, it has this very significant, like, they have the Oregon, I think it's called Film History Museum or something like that, is located there. The first film that was there was like this 1950s, I can't even remember. It's like some weird kind of like space horror sea monster kind of thing or whatever. But and there's movies like that. There was also like the Monster of Crater Lake, right? Is another one. So there's kind of this 1950s fascination with Oregon in certain ways as a landscape. But you're right in terms of the Goonies is by far the biggest. It like really puts it on the map. And then there's a lot of films that come after it that are either filmed in Astoria or filmed and set in Astoria. Some other ones to name, I already did mention Kindergarten Cop, but Short Circuit, which we will also do. The first one is set in Astoria. The Black Stallion is another one. Kindergarten Cop, Free Willy,
say it,
Free
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 Willy.
Free Willy 2, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, right?
Oh, I never saw that one. After two, I was
Ben
like, I'd never do these again.
Benji the Hunted, which was a big movie in my inner
I
circle.
remember
Um,
that movie.
The Ring and The Ring 2, right? So those are later ones, as well as Into the Wild. So anyways, there's a bunch of them. Some of those are just filmed there, right? But not set there. Like it's actually pretended that they're in a different setting.
Hmm.
But it becomes a kind of like, I mean, it's interesting in that respect. I don't really understand why. I have to say that. Like the Oregon coast is quite beautiful. You get those kind of like volcanic rock features out into the water like you see in the film, the caves, like all of that again as I was mentioning, like the geological stuff in Oregon, like all of that stuff is, quite accurate. It's also cold. right? So this is the thing, and my wife was like, "What the fuck?" when we lived out in Oregon for a while. Like, people on the East Coast go to the beach, right, for like warmth and the sun and getting into the water. The water is like 40 degrees in Oregon. It's water that comes down from the Arctic Circle. And it it's what people go to the coast in Oregon for is to look at it, right? Because it is like, I think there's some, again, it looks nice. You could go to tide pools, stuff like this, but people don't get in the water. Like, you might put your toe in
Mm,
it. Maybe you put on a wetsuit if you're like really like just love being in the freezing cold water and like surf or something like that, but that's not really a thing. Um, and you go actually in a lot of parts of Oregon to get away from the heat, which is something I think people don't really understand. People imagine Oregon as this rainy place, as dark as, being kind of like cold and moody and stuff like that. And that is somewhat true up in like Portland, north of Portland, Astoria area, like up to Seattle. Like, you do get a lot of rain, a lot of that kind of stuff. But most of the state is, I mean, large aspects of the state are high desert. Like, so there's a lot of the state that is hot, there's not a lot of water. And then along what people call the I-5 corridor, it's just like I think for at one point, like 90% of the population, I don't know if this is still the case, 90% of the population west of the Rockies lived within 30 minutes of the I-5 corridor. And so like everything, it's kind of like I-95 on the East Coast, right? Everything is sort of right along this. Um, and a lot of the aspects, like where I grew up, you won't have you have 100+ degree heat for months at a time. You have fires, right? So actually going and getting away and getting to the coast is like a refreshing kind of getaway. And in the summertime, it's probably like 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's what the temperatures are like there. So in that sense, I do think the film kind of accurately captures that. Like, it is, you don't see anybody like, sunbathing or anything like that on the Oregon coast. And that's just not something that happens. And so there's that. The other thing, just quickly, is Astoria is kind of out of the way of anything. Right,
mm-hmm.
so it's not, because it's in a very kind of far northeast corner of the state. I don't actually, maybe it's more of a getaway for people in Portland. That could be possible, that it's kind of a coastal getaway every once in a while. But I lived in Oregon for about 25 years off and on, and I don't think I've ever been to Oregon, or ever been to Astoria. Right? It's just not something that would be like and spent a decent amount of time on the Oregon coast, but it's way up there, and it's kind of just in this corner up there where there's really no reason for me to go unless I was like a just total film geek and was like, "Oh, I want to see where Free Willy was filmed, and I want to look at the Goonies." See, like,
And
so yeah,
people do it.
and people
I
do
mean,
that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, one of the things about when movies get shot in towns a lot. So I know this because an old friend of mine, her mother, what she did after she retired was she was basically rented out most of her house outside of Toronto, to actors for long-term stays when they were shooting movies and television series. She's like Mark Ruffalo stayed in my place for like 2 weeks. And communities, once they come there, a certain amount of films start shooting there. Sometimes an economy kind of develops around it, right? So people can do things. You can rent out the houses. So if a studio or production company knows that this place is friendly towards that, and that the community can kind of set up where they can kind of set place there for for a few months and shoot the film, they'll definitely take it. Especially also because, like, I will say, it is very scenic and very like filming, like film wise, because of the hills, a lot of the trees, you could shoot through things. You have access to multiple types of locations, right? So you would have like, you know, series of houses, lots of trees, foliage, all this type of stuff, right? And then you also have a coast that you could shoot at. So like you have like a multiple amount of things. So I could totally see Hollywood, who wants like kind of certain diversity of visual kind of platforms, totally falling in love with it, because it is very filmic in that kind of way, and it lends itself. So, and that kind of goes back to my other point, right? If you're like, hey, I'm gonna set a movie in Astoria, you already did this, you shoot that up the ladder to the studio, they're like, cool. Oh, it's like a Goonies thing, but not a Goonies thing. It's with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and like, yeah. And when I say this shit, this is how they sound. Like, go watch The Player. Watch like the pitch scene of The Player. That's literally what they do. It's not a lie, right? Like if people have not seen The Player, watch the opening 10 minutes where they're all doing the pitches to Tim Robbins, right? It's Pretty Women meets Out of Africa, right? Like they do that shit. It's what happens. So like I'm sure that when Kindergarten Cop got pitched, they were like, it's the Goonies, but it's an action film, but the action star becomes a kindergarten teacher, right? I'm dead fucking serious. That is how they do it. Trust me,
Yeah, and it makes sense too on some level also in terms of what you're talking about, because also there would be an economic incentive for the town also to like present itself in because and also like there's probably it wouldn't be expensive, right? Other than like getting stuff there, which would be kind of a challenge. Like it wouldn't be expensive place, because there's just, especially in that time period, right? Everything I think along the coasts of both sides of the country has gotten much more expensive at this point, because people want to have like the second house and do Airbnb stuff and all this kind of stuff, but in the 80s, like having a place in a town like Astoria or whatever would not have been, it wasn't like some great sign of financial success or something like that, so I just say that to say it wouldn't be that expensive for them to rent out certain houses or this other stuff to do these kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can get into the movie unless there's other things.
We can get into the movie. I mean, so this is like going to be an interesting movie to talk about, and I'd be curious how you want to go about it, because like it's a movie that's a lot of gags and then of course a lot of like forward action. But what I experienced watching it this time was all of those things are circled around like dominant tropes that they keep regurgitating over and over again, right? There's like these big tropes that they want to theme everything around, and then constantly like reactivate. I mean, to the very end, from the beginning to the very end, and like they don't subvert the tropes at all. They just like actualize them more or like breathe them out. They actually all, in my opinion, come to their like tropish conclusion, even in like the kind of happy ending of the film. But yeah, it's all done through this like really big, chaotic adventure. Right. I mean, with the movie, I mean, I guess we could like set up like the plot, right, and like the opening sequence, which I think the opening sequence is kind of hilarious, right? Because they open with the like, it's like the Goonies skull, right, or the skull, right, and like is the crossbones with it too, skull and crossbones, right, in the opening kind of shot, I think.
I think it's just a skull, but I can't.
It's the skull, yeah. Right? And it goes in the eye or something like that. You see the Goonie, right? And the scene opens with the Fratellis, right? So you see like, hey, you maggots, right? You see, you hear the warden, right? Walks in. And I have to say, I mean, one of like my overarching things is like, this is a kid's movie. And I watched it for 2 hours going, this is a kid's movie? And I kept saying that.
The 80s is just fascinating that way, right? Because they just did
Yeah.
not they like didn't give a fuck about us. They were just
No,
like,
like
you know.
this is the kids movie, right? So you start the movie, right? He and like the corrections officer walking in, you maggots, get your lunch, blah, 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 blah. And then you see hanging up Robert Davi, right? Like it's like he's hanging, like he's like hung himself, right? And I'm like, oh shit, that's right. And I remembered everything immediately, right? And he's hanging. You have like a low angle shot to see him like in his jail cell, and then the guy takes off. He says, "You think I would be stupid enough to commit?" Does he say he said kill myself? Right. So it's like a suicide note, right? Of course, it's not a suicide note. It's how he breaks out of jail. He kicks the dude, da 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 da, and he's able to kind of muster himself out of jail to find his brother and mother, which we'll get into, waiting for him in their RV. It's like a Pathfinder, I think, or something like that, right? In their truck. So, and this is kind of how the scene opens with this kind of like action thing, right? Like you see, like and it's played by, so the people who play it, the Fratellis, is who you learn. I find to be very interesting, like choices, right? You have Robert Davi, who people see character actor. He's in Die Hard. He's one of the FBI agents. I think he's actually really hilarious in Die Hard. He always he's even actually funny in this. Like he has like a way about him that I've always quite liked in movies. Like he has a kind of thing. Early Joe Pantoliano, people all know him from The Matrix, right? His career really kind of, I think, jumps in like the later years, but in the 90s, he really did something. And Anne Ramsey, who was a figure of the 80s. This is actually her biggest movie. This and like Throw Mama from the Train. I didn't realize she died so soon after this movie. She only lived for 3 years after. She didn't even make it to like 60. And so they play this kind of like crime family, and you see them, this crime family, right, in a shootout, right, in like the streets of Astoria. And they're like driving through, and this is also how they introduce all of the like characters. So you see like Corey Feldman, Mouth. Actually, you don't see the Walshes. The Walshes are at the end. I think you see Data. You see a bunch of them, right? Like in this kind of like large like opening sequence where like there's like the shootout happening in the street, but you also get to see like Astoria and all like the small town vibe, but like it's suddenly being terrorized by these like Italian, and that's the other part of it, like these like Italian gangsters who are like in their town, which doesn't really make sense to me. Like I'm like, why are they in this little as like cop place? Like, what is this weird shit? Shooting guns, right? There was one scene in the thing that I had to ask you, Jay. So, like, there's a scene where like they're in like the car, in like the truck, and they go on the beach, and they like basically like hide themselves in like a beach race of trucks. And I asked myself, I was like, do they do this shit in Oregon on the beach? Like truck races on the water? Like, I've never heard of anything like that in my life.
I don't know. I didn't grow up on the coast like that, but it absolutely wouldn't surprise me. Like Oregonians, especially in the 80s and the 90s, like we, you and I and Harvard have like group chat jokes about this kind of stuff, but like there's figuring out ways to entertain yourself, especially if you have access to like a truck or dirt bikes or quads, right? Or that's, four-wheelers, whatever. Like this was, yeah. So you do all kinds of silly stuff. And again, like I said, like there's no police. So it just doesn't, like, there's not really anybody who's going to stop you from doing things like that. So I don't know, is the short answer, but also it's not far-fetched. You're muted, sorry.
What they try to like do is like this like crime thing is happening all while the small town life is happening. So you see like all of them do their things. You get to see Kerri Green be a cheerleader. You see Mouth, Corey Feldman's dad. He's working, right? It's so that you get to see all these things kind of planted, right? You see Chunk, which I'm probably gonna end up talking a lot about Chunk in this movie, in this conversation, because wow, wow, a lot there, a lot there, and uh, but then it all kind of circles back after to the end that to like the Walsh's house, right, which is kind of like the centerpiece family, played by Sean Astin, as like the key, the key like lead, right, and his older brother, right, and like their family, right, and they're kind of like the center of everything, and then also his dad, which we'll get into, who is like the. It's funny because his dad is hardly in the movie, right, but he's talked about like so much, and everything kind of reference to like his own research of like history, quote unquote, whatever that is, and artifacts and so forth and so on. So that's kind of how the movie starts. It like kind of gives you that. um I'm like,
Just
I'm
a
wondering, go ahead.
just a quick thing on the Fratellis, like, and I don't know if I'm reaching too much here.
You probably aren't.
So so yeah, I mean, I never, I don't think I ever in my life met an Italian American in Oregon. And I don't know, maybe Portland had some sort of, like mob underworld, kind of element of it in the 80s. But actually what came to my mind when I was watching this, um, which was prominent in particularly in the 1970s in Oregon, was the George Jackson Brigade, which Ed Mead, rest in power, was a part of, and Mark Cook, the Black Panther, and then you have this character of Mama, and immediately she recalled to me, Bo, Rita Bo Brown, and Rita Bo Brown was from Klamath Falls, Southern Oregon, which is very not far at all from where I grew up. Um, but the George Jackson Brigade robbed a lot of banks, and these were, within their practices, revolutionary expropriations, right, to support armed struggle, in defense and in solidarity with third world and national liberation movements, right? Obviously, from the name, the George Jackson Brigade, very inspired by George Jackson, and taking up and writing about, politics of armed struggle in the period. And, we did an interview with Ed Mead a few years ago that I still, kind of cherish on a certain level. Um, but yeah, so I don't know that this, but like the notion of, I mean, it's kind of funny because on some respect, like Mama's character being this kind of, is it a man? Is it a woman? What are the gender dynamics here? Like this very much recalls Bo Brown, who at the time would have, she referred to herself as a butch lesbian, essentially. But at the same time, like the George Jackson Brigade was known for like cross dressing and doing a lot of different things in terms of their, their different kind of activities, and to try to like create some different questions around who actually is doing these things and that sort of stuff, right? And we're very like it was interesting talking to Ed Mead about it, because they very much rejected kind of modern gender politics being placed upon what they were doing in the 70s and the 80s. But nowadays people would have more question around like gender fluidity and trans and things like this, right? But that wasn't like the language that they had at the time. But certainly they were influenced by like women's liberation, gay liberation, the kind of sexual revolution, right, that was going on alongside kind of third world liberation. So you get this different stuff kind of mixed in there. Obviously, the Fratellis are not that, right? It's a Italian like family, but it was kind of interesting in that respect, because in some ways, like to tell this story about Oregon, which like I realize that's not really Spielberg. Like Spielberg couldn't really care less about a lot of that stuff, which is probably why it doesn't have anything to do with it. But that's actually like the closest thing that you could kind of point to in that era, because you know, they might look on some level like these folks, and they did go around robbing banks, and they also were breaking people out of prison, right? Or like help, you know, a lot of their struggle was like inside outside prison stuff. And so and including like actually bombings of corrections officers and things like that, a correction facility and corrections, like maybe even wardens and things like this, like, you know, so they were, yeah, quite militant group at the time.
I don't. Here's why I don't think you're off at all. Is that the way they kind of piecemeal all this stuff is very chaotic, right? So when you write a script, you say like, all right, we need a group of gangsters, make them Italian, Fratellis, right? What's a tough mama look like? Yeah, you remember those old like brigady ladies who used to like, you know, rob banks with the give them a beret. Yeah, that looks tough. I'm talking like this because that's kind of how they do it. They like piecemeal shit, right? So like the coding that's out there, funneled through like mass media representation of this stuff, and like the denigration of these movements, and pretty much saying like, you know, liberation movements were the same as, you know, Italian criminals. They would just like mix it and make these like mix hodgepodges. So I don't think you're off in that kind of way, because like the Fratellis as like a trio, they make no sense. Like when you're watching the movie, as like the kind of big like antagonists, like they make no sense as characters, right? Because then they add other things. But I think a lot of it has to do with like generally how they think of people who are from like the dregs of existence, or like the who are coming into small towns, right? Right. And these are people who are definitely outsiders, and they've found their way into these places, right? Right. And they're ethnically named, right? So forth and so on. Yeah, exactly. So I'm saying
So
like they would definitely see
that's
a picture like this and then totally code a character around that. Maybe even a costume designer would see this and say, does that work for you? You know?
yeah, and this is like a one of the photos of Rita Bo Brown, like close to her passing, right? Like a few years ago. Again, R.I.P. But yeah, so
Yeah. But it's like, you know, and like that's like really, really, really how they kind of operate, right? And like, that's kind of how the film kind of goes, right? So you get their whole thing, right? And like one of the other big things, and we'll kind of get into it, is they're like the brothers hate each other. There's like kind of like would it be Oedipal? I don't even know. It's like a thing with the mom and the like, you know, all that type of shit. It's just so it's annoying. Like I don't want to. I can't get the right terminology because my brain doesn't really care to figure out the like weird shit that they're trying to do with the two brothers hating each other and the mom and slapping them and the guns and all that type of shit. Because we'll get to the third brother in a little bit, right? And then you get all the way back to like the Walsh's house, which is like I said, like the centerpiece, right? And they kind of start early in the movie at the Walsh's house, basically that like they know that they're basically all having to move really soon. And it kind of gets like divvied out in the movie a bit. You kind of get the explanation, probably like the first like 20 minutes of the movie, of understanding what's happened. That, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jake, because like the way they kind of do it is just like very like it's very simple. Like they don't really get into it, but like their house has been foreclosed. And I guess and it like their house is like once the Walshes do it, everything dominoes out so that everyone gets bought out, right? That's kind of how I understood it. It didn't really make any sense to me. And essentially, there's like these corporate people who basically are going to buy the whole thing and build country clubs, and pretty much eradicate the small town. And then all of their friends, and then even the people who eventually become part of the group, are basically are going to be affected by it. So Mouth, Chunk, Data, and then of course eventually was it Allie? Is that what her name? Right, Allie, right? Kerri Green's character, and I think what Martha Plimpton's character's name is, which is very
I have it.
right. You know,
Um,
yeah, but like all of them, right? They'll all be affected by this kind of like takeover, and they'll all be
it's
displaced. Mhm.
yeah, it's Andy and Steph.
Andy and
But
Steph, right? Yeah.
yeah, but you're right. I mean, it's like the setup is very like it's just like you just get dropped into a world, right, where like all of this has already kind of happened, and they know that they have like one day basically left before. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not. I guess foreclosure. I don't. I didn't really understand fully, how it was working, but essentially, and this is the part about it that because this movie does have there's people on the left for sure that like aspects of this movie and usually also do critique aspects of it, and we'll get to why obviously at the end. A lot of it
Hmm.
just has to do with the conclusion, right, or what the narrative becomes around the thing, right? But the thing is that you have developers who are going to come in, who are going to displace this entire area called the Goondocks, right, which is why they're called the Goonies, right, is because they live in the Goondocks. um and the notion of it, right, is it's just a, you know, lower class, like, poor slash working class neighborhood within Astoria that is basically prime real estate for development, and they're going to make a golf course. And this actually that is a real Oregon coastal concern, right? That kind of thing. I don't know the timeline along which some of these golf courses were built, but there are major golf courses on the Oregon coast. Steph Curry and the Warriors, when they, won their last championship in like what 2022, I think it was. I don't remember if it was that one or that one before. They came up and they golfed in this area outside of Bandon, Oregon, right? And spent a bunch of money at the local bars and stuff like that. And I know that because my brother-in-law lives out there. And so like that is a it is a thing where they develop these golf courses, of course, which are not, again, I mean, this is like capitalism 101 stuff, but obviously it's not for the people of the place, right, that this golf course or country club gets developed. It's to attract people from Portland or San Francisco or Seattle, right, to come and become like kind of a vacation destination. You're going to golf there, etc. I don't really know why you would want to golf on the Oregon coast. It's cold. It's not, it's not really it's kind of like going to Scotland to golf, right? Like, which people do. Um, but it's not, it's not Pebble Beach or something like that. Anyway, so that that's a thing, and I think that obviously presents the basis of a class politics that does exist within the film, right? Is that you are identifying with working class or poor protagonists, and you are made to not like, right? Not only the developers, but also like their kids, and the rich kids within the film are the
Hmm.
enemies essentially, which
Hmm.
again, as we're going to get into more of these like 80s team movies and stuff like that, it is a trend that you see sometimes, not always. Like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you're basically identifying with the rich kids, right? But sometimes within some of these 80s films, you are, depending upon the director and the story, kind of identifying with the lower classes, right? And this is
Hmm.
one of those cases where they are facing capitalist displacement. They're facing gentrification, right? They're in a situation where they don't really have and this is the big problem with the class politics of the film, which we'll get into, is like there's not really any discussion or consideration of like, how do we deal with this? It's like, let's go find some fucking treasure.
Right. Which I think is also part of the thing too, because if you think about that time in the 80s, though, and even what like Reagan campaigned on, we talked about this with Hoosiers a bit. Reagan also did campaign on saving the small town. So like that kind of also politics is not necessarily going to pull them to a leftist end. It could still keep them. It'll keep them to the person who basically will acknowledge them, right? in that kind of way, which is like the problem with two-party politics, in general. And yeah, I mean, when you see that, and like there's definitely the kind of the presence of like the corporate people, and like this movie is a kind of like get back, and these are going to be the adventurers, because the big thing that we'll eventually get to, it's all done through this kind of adventurism and this idea of treasure and claiming loot, right? Which kind of goes back to Jay's point of the settler colonial thought space, that it's about who claims it, not where it comes from, not its origins, but who gets to stake claim on it. So more than at the end of the day, this movie is the most American movie, right? It is American through and out, and you can't claim this shit because this shit is about theft is okay because everything is prehistory and they didn't actually have any ownership, and I can stake my claim into it now. I'm jumping the gun because we haven't got to that part yet, but that's really like the body of this movie, and why at the end of the day you can't the politics of this are fucking empty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting thinking about this film too, as again, through the lens of imperialism, um both in terms of what it justifies, but also then in terms of what it exports ideologically, and how that, of course, kind of serves an ongoing justification, right? So I do think about this a lot, because also growing up in Oregon, you spend like a whole year of social studies studying the Oregon Trail. In Oregon, like, is a big thing, right? It's a part of at least I don't know whether this has changed at all, but it was a part of the state curriculum. Um, I mean, there's the whole, like, the state song is fucking bananas, so bad that they actually changed some of the words recently. But and I'll pull up those in a bit because it's fascinating. We are the land of the empire builders, right? That's how it starts out. um, and so I mean, first bar, right? So the uh this idea, right, of this treasure, right, which, yeah, I mean, we could go to it because we'll talk about some of the funny stuff along the way and all of this, but very quickly they're like playing around. They go up in the attic, right, and they
Well,
find
I do
okay.
want to go to the character. Let's go to the characters first, because then we could talk about that. Because when the movie starts, you start getting like the main group come in, right? So you have the Walshes, and we'll talk about this. They're like the settler colonial group. So the first one you have is Mouth, played by Corey Feldman. Shout out to Corey Feldman. We don't have enough time to go through his career, and it's just, it's a thing to kind of bring it to the room, though, because like Feldman's like long career, the things that he's associated with, kids movies, and then like the horrors that him and many of the people that were around
Yeah.
in his his faced in Hollywood. It just like the Goonies also does have that little bit of there's like a stain to it that I'm not
Yeah.
saying anything happened on the Goonies, but it's just how it was situated, and how he's
I
situated in the whole thing. It's just go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should talk about that for a minute, just for
Yeah.
a sec before getting in, because like you have this ensemble of really honestly amazingly talented young child actors, right? And this is a thing in the 80s and 90s, right? In particular, it's not that we don't have movies anymore that feature kids, but a lot less actually than there were in this period. And there's just so many horror stories, documented as well as covered up, right? Around just to say, like, Hollywood's pedophilia and, sexual abuse and rape culture basically around
Yeah.
these kids, right? And, some folks have come out and spoken out about it. A lot have not, as well, probably because they want to still maintain, their careers, as well as just like, people don't want to always air all that stuff out, right? Because it's freaking painful and all of that. And so, yeah, I mean, again, like I said, like you said, I don't know anything obviously sort of specific to this film, but you can't like look at all of these kids on set and the films and these films in the period, I think, and not think about that history.
Yeah,
You
and they're
know,
all connected to other films with other. I mean, Kerri Green was in Lucas and that has a very sordid history now because of the, what I said about Haim and Charlie Sheen. Like it gets. I mean, it's a circular. It's just a big era of really terrible things, right? And the Goonies is like shown to be this like really great thing that happened, but we also know what was happening to them as movie was made, right? And all these movies were made, so it's important to bring that into the room. So with that being said, Mouth is the first one you get in, right? So Mouth comes in, and Mouth's character is interesting to me because he has a mouth. He's a foul mouth. He curses. He like encourages them to do fucked up things, right? Yeah, let's go get in the car, but you didn't get your license. He's like, he messes with the older brother, right? But the thing you eventually find out about Mouth, and I'm setting something up here, is that he speaks Spanish. And that gets put in there eventually. So that leads you to Code. You don't know what the heritage is, but it leads you to think that he's somewhat Hispanic, Latino, something like that, right? He has it in his heritage of something because he can speak Spanish. And this gets invoked we'll talk about that scene when the domestic worker comes in and he has a kind of exchange with her, right? So Mouth is the first one, and he comes in and he's one of the friends, right? So then the second friend that comes in, is it Data? Is Data, or is it Chunks, the second friend who comes in? I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. Oh, no, it is Data, right? So Data comes in, and Data, which we've talked about, by Ke Huy Quan, right? Who, this is his second movie after Temple of Doom, which we need to do, one of the more racist movies ever made. Data is a whiz kid who makes cheap gadgets that don't work that well, who happens to be he's Asian. So this is the second friend who kind of comes in, and he comes in, breaks their screen door, so forth and so on. So in the middle of the 80s, you have a East Asian, a Chinese, who can't, who makes cheap goods, right? That don't work very well, but it has a certain level of ingenuity, and you feel good about it, right? And then the last friend who comes in is Chunk, right? He's the fat kid, the chubby kid, right? And they make him do a thing called the truffle shuffle, right? Right, where he has to do his stomach thing. Now, I forgot this when I watched the film, and I said early in the film, I was like, "Is Chunk Jewish?" I said to myself, I think Chunk is Jewish. And then, of course, later in the movie, he has 3 references that I remember vividly, probably more. He says bullet holes the size of matzo balls. Then he's talking about when he was in Hebrew school during his moment where he takes the big story, right? And so I was like, so he's Jewish. So one of the other things about Chunk is that Chunk is a liar. And he consistently tells lies, and his big features is he lies a lot. He can smell ice cream and food everywhere, right? And then eventually he befriends a sloth and brings him home. And I'm watching this movie, and I'm like, oh my goodness! So you have the white settler and the 3 male and his older brother. And the 3 male best friends are these ethnically coded people around him. And I was like, the fucking race politics of this movie are shit. I said, wow. I was like, anti-Semitism, anti-Haitian, anti-Latin, just bad. I was like, fucking, I was like, wow, right? I mean, all of them were really bad, but Chunk really stood out. Because then the other part of it is that this is Spielberg's story. So then I'm starting to think of Spielberg's own shit that he, thinks about within his own community and the way they kind of, characterize themselves. And I just, this movie, right? I was like, wow. When I watched it this time, because the reason why I'm bringing it in here, everything is built around it, right? With Mouth, right? His nastiness, the jokes, right? He can speak Spanish, this and that, right? How he treats others, right? Everything with Data is basically his cheap gadgets. They end up working, but they kind of work because of happenstance, right? But we should like him because he's cute, right? And he means well, right? And then everything with Chunk is like no one believes him because he's been a liar all these times, right? He has to actually confess his lies, right? Um, the thing with like the smelling food, they constantly belittle him, right? And they're what they're kind of like creating there. And then the fact that like, and I'm gonna say it's like, because and I think it's applicable to use it because this is like a movie about like the treasure stuff too, and you're also invoking the old world. The fact that he befriends and eventually takes home a sloth really is coded with some old school anti-Semitism shit to me. And I was like, nah, this movie's fucking some weirdo shit. And they have really fucking strange thoughts about the world. So I needed to set that up because I feel like the rest of the movie is all coded around that. And we also have to get to the young women because when we get to the two, because they're another series of tropes that are very, very, very useful within the film too. And like I don't want to hide them as well because they're very significant as well. But this is like the first kind of grouping of the male Goonies.
Yeah. Ooh. I mean, one of the things that's interesting on some respects is that the overall composition of the group of kids, I mean, again, like so historically Oregon is, I know people say, well, this is the case for every state in the United States, but Oregon is actually founded constitutionally as a white utopia, right? Black people are not legally allowed to own property in Oregon, which is a northern state, right, or a western state around the time of the Civil War, right? Um, and the whole term, the state of Jefferson, right? People sometimes equate this to Thomas Jefferson. There's some resonance there, but the other is Jefferson Davis, right? And there, the Jefferson Highway, which goes north and south, has, I think, still maybe not anymore, but for many years it had a plaque to Jefferson Davis at the top of it, right? And so there's a lot of like racist history. There's also but so that racist history, also the sundown towns and stuff, which obviously is a national phenomenon. That racist history, the reason I bring it up is because it sets the groundwork for like a specific. By the time you get to the 80s, like who is there in the place, right? Like obviously the other part is the ethnic cleansing of Oregon, right, which is very real. The Nez Perce Indians like chased out, like all of this kind of stuff, and then there's all kinds of other atrocities and all of that. So it is a very white state still. It has diversified some, of course, over the last 40 years. Finally, I think it was in the 2000s that they removed some of those clauses about like black people not being able to own property and stuff like that. So like there's a long time where the law stops being enforced in those levels because of course it can't really be constitutionally enforced at a federal level, but it still was like on the books because you didn't have the political will to remove elements of that racist history for a very long time. Um, So growing up in Oregon, like this type of friend group is not that, like that you would have a majority white friend group is obvious, right? Unless you're in Portland, right, or one of the areas around Portland where there are some black folks who end up there, right? And there are different communities in Portland in particular. There's a Jewish community, right? But outside, I say this to say outside of Portland and maybe a little bit Eugene, because it has University of Oregon and is one of probably the second largest city in Oregon. Um, you know, it's just very white, especially in the 80s and the 90s, very, very white. Um, as far as like you do, and this so there's interesting things, right? Because like having the one Asian friend, having the one Jewish friend, having a having some people who are there present as like migrant laborers or house workers and stuff like those are actual realities in this period, but they would be like one among a sea of white youth, right? So that is like part of the reality that is produced by this legal regime, settler regime, et cetera, in Oregon. Um, so like as watching the Goonies as somebody growing up in Oregon, I think we saw a sort of representation in a certain element of something that does seem close to the reality that way. However, I say that to also say that those elements that you're laying out, right, of these people there's also with Chunk, one thing you didn't mention is like this idea of kvetching, right? Like, so he's complaining constantly about things, guys, right? Which
It's
is
the
another
Woody Allen
Jewish,
thing. It's like the Woody Allen thing. 100%.
yeah,
Someone said he
yeah,
sounds like a New York Jewish person. I'm like,
yeah,
yeah, he don't sound like he's from Oregon. It sounds like a Woody Allen trope.
exactly. And this is the thing is that in the context of Oregon in the 1980s, like playing up your ethnic or racial difference would have not happened. It just did, especially in small town, rural, suburban areas. Like it was much. It there was a strong impulse to mute those things down because of the amount of racism, because people made jokes honestly, whether it's in elementary school, middle school, high school, people made racist jokes, right? Calling people ethnic slurs. Like this was just a part of the culture of the place, right? And so like, you know, I knew a couple of Jewish kids growing up in our like, 1600 kids in our high school, right? I knew a couple right? They would never go around like advertising or telling people that they were Jewish. And they also I don't even think either of them like went to like observed a lot of religious sort of stuff, right? And so like all like this idea of like talking about the bar mitzvah, like yeah, that might happen in Portland, it's not gonna happen in other parts of the state. Like, I just don't think so. It wasn't that's not my experience, right? And obviously, I can't speak for these groups of people, only speak for my observations of knowing people. But like, there's a strong kind of assimilate in order to avoid being the outcast again, right? And so that's also a weird thing, right? Is just sort of this idea like homogenizing in this group of people and they're all sort of outcasts. I mean, obviously being poor in any place I think does create some level of, like, oh, they don't have things, and the kids that do, like, there are those kind of class dynamics that play out among white people, and I'm sure other groups of people as well, right? But just broadly speaking, that part is I mean, it's just very Hollywood, right? Like both of those characters in particular, thinking about Data and thinking about Chunk, that would not be, I would strongly argue, like how those kids would project themselves into the world.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why this is done in this film is to help characterize the Walshes as great people, right? That they befriend a kind of a group of periphery, but remember Spielberg calls them outcasts. So how you associate the outcasts with non white or non waspy white with like the Jewish, those are outcasted people. So like they're immediately coded. A Jewish person in this context who's also overweight is the other thing, and I think because that's the other big thing with it, like with Chunk, right? So he's also an outcast, I think, because of the weight and things like that, right? And the economic status, right? It does that. So basically, he's trying to immediately code what being an outcast is, right? It's funny you bring this up. There's a great play by Charles Gordon called "No Place to Be Somebody," and it's about a bar. And it's like a black man. He's a pimp and all this, and he has like a white sex worker like girlfriend and the whole thing. And she befriends like another black woman as a sex worker. And in the play, as the play kind of goes, there's this moment where as the white woman is like losing it, she puts herself in blackface and she says, "I'm black and I'm proud," right? And the black sex worker goes like, "What the fuck's your problem?" She's like, "Well, because I'm poor, I'm black." Right. And she chastises her. She's like, "Look, I'm with you on a class level, but that shit is bullshit." And they get into this big thing. It's a really amazing scene, right? In this play. And it kind of goes to this point of like how people want to code things, and how Spielberg and Donner and Columbus want to code what being an outcast is, and the usefulness of ethnicities, right, to help them make the white person an outcast. And it's fucked up and it's racist. Like straight the fuck up. It's just fucked up and it's racist, right? So like there's like the obvious racism, and then there's like the kind of like unobvious racism of this whole construction, right? And it's just, but that's Spielberg, man. Like, look, he did Temple of Doom a year before that, which is, like I said, one of the most racist movies. It's Birth of a Nation levels, it's Delta Force levels, it's up there, right? It's in the top 10 racists ever. So like, should we be surprised that he makes that he makes characters like this? We should not, and we should not let his ass off the hook, which I think he gets really let off the hook.
The other thing I'll say too, and I mean this might get a little spicy for folks, but it's just my experience, right? That like within the Oregon context in this time period, that if somebody was there as an ethnic minority, that they were often either adopted or they were actually from a more mobile class position, right? Like, because why would you go there, right? Like, unless it's like, okay, we can set up a business there or something like that, right? And so, um, that's also kind of the interesting thing is like none of the like there was sort of two types of people that I experienced growing up in Oregon that were really poor, right? And it was, unemployed white people or like very marginally employed white people. And then it was, Mexican migrant workers primarily, right? And that was it, right? And other people were working class for sure. Like a lot of parents where I lived, worked in the logging industry. That was their thing. And so it's not like they're making a ton of money, but they could absolutely make enough to own a house, to maybe have an RV, have nice stuff for their kids, go on trips. Like so it was like a fine, sort of like it's that existence that, the Make Again America Great Again crowd yearns to get back to. Absolutely, So yeah.
So this is actually a perfect thing to bring in, because you said about migrant, and like, so as they're there, they're kind of discussing, the issues that are happening about having to move and like the disappointments with it. Um, and then eventually the mom comes home, and the mom is another like one of these character actors you see in all the movies, man. Mary Ellen Trainor, like she's in all the movies playing these kinds of characters, right? And she brings home a domestic worker who's a Latin American woman who can't speak who can't speak English, right? And this is where you learn that mouth can speak Spanish, because she basically is going to help them pack. Right? They've brought her in. I think the mother's hand doesn't, is like broken or like hurt or something like that. So she needs to have her help. And mouth offers to help, right? And it's played by Lupe Ontiveros, who I think is really known for Selena. I think she played the woman. Well, she plays Selena's mom, or the woman who, I think she plays the woman who murders Selena. I think in the movie. I've never actually seen the Selena movie. To be honest with you. But yeah, she's mostly known for that. But so Mouth, you know, brings her. You know, he's like the translator. But of course, when he's translating, he's basically like giving the wrong translations, talking about like, you know, sex toys, torture chambers, where they hide the drugs, right? That she'll be locked and chained, I think, if she does like the work wrong. And like, for that to be a joke that like has no, first of all, for that to be a joke is bad. For that to be a joke that has no consequences, and it's just kind of like left as like an open-ended thing, and she's just gonna go, oh, whatever, you know. Well, she's, oh, I'm in a crazy place, right? I'm gonna keep working. That's just yeah. Someone just wrote, shit was so disturbing. It's disturbing. Like rewatching it, I was just like, geez, Louise, like what the fuck is this? I had to like take a breath. I think that was the moment I was doing laundry. So I was like, let me go do some laundry. I was like, you know what? Let me go actually take a pause and put this shit in the dryer, because I need a moment after that like thing that like made me feel pretty dirty.
Yeah, and again, like this is like to also speak a little bit to give, you know, I'm not trying to make excuses for anything, right? But like to add some of the context in which like young white kids felt comfortable saying a bunch of racist shit and making jokes in Spanish, like learning how to say inappropriate shit in Spanish was definitely something that was very like, you know, kids just did that, and they would be like, oh, this is how you say this is how you say this, right? And it's like not at all, but like movies like this do like provide a certain like, oh well, hey, if this is a popular Steven Spielberg Hollywood beloved film, like why can't I do that if that's, if this is the running joke? And like you said, there's no consequence for it within the movie, right? There's not even the actress, even the character, not the actress but the character, Rosalita, right, is her name? Yeah. She just is like, oh, this is a crazy place, but just goes right along. Like it doesn't, she's not bothered by the fact that he has just threatened her with sexual torture, basically. Like it's like, what? Yeah, it's wild.
It's just wild. And it's like he says, it's a kid's film. This is like what you see in like a movie for kids. And I was like, oh wow. Cause like the next joke in the house is like they had a statue, right? And the statue falls, Chuck's also a klutz, right? I mean, like the things that they keep adding to Chunk's stuff, he's a klutz. So, and they call him one like several times. An idiot, so he drops the statue and the penis big part falls off, right? And he glues it off, and like they have a shot of it, like it's
that is hilarious, by the way.
No, it is funny. There's so you pissing up forward, like
yeah,
but it's just like, damn.
And what you say is like, that's my mom's favorite part of the statue.
That's the mom's favorite part. Which is actually really fun. That I cracked the fuck up. I don't think I really caught that as a kid as being like funny, but I was like, this is totally a joke. And this is Richard Donner, like these two older white dudes making their movie, right? Yeah, add that joke and have the kids say it. And you're like, go ahead.
And that's a really important thing to always remember when you're watching these films, right? Is that you have as a kid watching this. Right. And I think, Samantha Youssef has talked about this and others, right? There's a way that you fall into it, like as if the people on screen are, are creating something in front of you, right? Like you don't necessarily as a youth, as a young kid, have a real understanding that like there's these weird adult men who are writing and filming this shit, right, to put messages and ideas like into your fucking head. Like, it's like you just sort of like, oh, like it's it's kids, like acting is like we're kids, like it. So it's there's a way that I think, yeah, I mean that it's an obvious thing, but it's just kind of sinister, I think, that we
But
let
it's not.
adults
I don't
create
think
this
it is
shit.
obvious though. I don't think people think about that. Like I'm trying to think about myself as a director with a bunch of like people who are under 18, and I have to film a scene which probably takes half a day around the joke of like a penis and someone's mom. Like the thought of that makes me go, yo, cut that scene, please. Why the fuck is
Right.
this in the movie? Why am I doing this movie? That become like that's just where I sit in the world. I'm not doing shit like that.
And we have to remind folks of that first Indiana Jones episode we did, right? And like that dialogue, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and I can't remember the other guy's name, the other, actor
Yeah.
or director or screenwriter or whatever that's involved in it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's mainly Lucas that's putting forward this like, oh yeah, like let's create this pedophilic, weird relationship between Indiana Jones and his love interest in the film,
Right.
right? And Spielberg is just there sort of like yeah, like like he doesn't he's not he's like kind of going
Right.
back up, but he's not like saying like, George, you're a fucking weirdo, we're not doing this, it's a family movie. Like, you know
Like we can't be doing this shit. But you know what? For them, this is what they feel. I don't know what they feel a bit because it is about their own expressions at the end of the day, and this I think is the idea of the maverick director and the maverick artist in this kind of way and how they see themselves, and they have this immense amount of power. So it doesn't really matter. They think at the end of the day, these kids are getting like the time of their life for 2 months and lots of money. So like, get over it. It ain't that big of a fucking deal. So after that sequence, I think we can now get to when they go upstairs. So one of the things that's established early
one
on is go ahead.
just
Yeah.
one quick thing is like the way
Mhm.
that after Chunk does the truffle shuffle or whatever, the way that they let him in,
Oh
this
my
is like a
god.
very like, so they like, it's like this whole contraption that has been created, that would be just like a chicken has to lay an egg and
Yeah.
like all this kind of stuff, right? To like open the gate, right? Instead of just walking. And I mean, nobody is ever doing that shit. But
No.
at the same, but on the flip side, like that, trying to maybe scenes like that, trying to figure out how to do some wild stuff like that is a very kind of 80s thing of like, okay, how could we create some kind of machine that will do this thing for us, using regular household items, dad's bowling ball, the chicken, like whatever else. So, but that is a very, yeah, Goonies moment there. But go
And
ahead. Yeah.
they mad at Data, and they mad at Data.
Yeah.
That's right. That was my response. I was like, they're mad at Data. Come on, dude. Yeah. Also, this fascination with like large contraptions in the 80s and to open things. I'm just kind of like, can we speed up the movie a bit? This is boring. Anyway, uh, so they begin to set up the kind of stuff that the dad's father's attic has this like stuff that you pretty much can't get to, right? And you shouldn't be touching. And they're like, and then Mouth, because he's the troublemaker, says, hey, I heard maybe there's rich stuff up there. Because like what's in the kids' heads is that there might be a miracle, because the brother sets up that only a miracle can basically make this corporate takeover not happen, right? So they go upstairs, and like to Jay's point is where like the whole thing about the treasure. So the dad has all these artifacts in his attic, right? And this is another like 80s trope that like the fortune is literally just waiting in the attic or the basement. It's like it's such an American movie trope, right? Oh yeah, shit, I mean, okay, I might be going too far here, but there's a way that it like, if you poor folks just looked around, you'd find your freedom, right? There's an element of that. I might be going too far, or like, but like it's like, dude, your fortune's been in the attic this whole time. What the fuck you complaining about? I don't know. It just I might be going a little too far, but like there's a vibe of that for me.
Why? So, I mean, this is one of the things that doesn't make like, what is his
Yo,
father's job?
he's a curator of are like artifacts, and it's not like a museum. It's like some kind of like center, but he's like he's I think he's the assistant or the assistant curator. So there's someone who's above him, and I guess he's the one who is what he does. So my thought, how it kind of comes to me, is he's probably some kind of, maybe he was like an archaeologist or anthropologist, some kind of that, and he, historian, and that's like the job that he got.
It's just very funny, right? Because it's like when I think about people losing their houses in Oregon, it is not people who are fucking like assistant curators or like, anthropologists or like no. But because honestly, like if you're in like academia or anything adjacent to that, like you are totally fine, right? You're probably upper class, like you're like going to the same country club as the kids that are, about to buy
Right.
up your house or whatever. But anyway, um, that part didn't ever make sense to me. But yeah, so they find the treasure map,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. This is one of the huge problems with the class politics of the film is like basically like you just need to be more adventurous, and find some like stuff that was stolen from indigenous people, and which I think that part is really, yeah, I mean it operates on a lot of levels, and I guess I do want to talk about it at this point. Is just one that you only it's always One-Eyed Willie's treasure, who is this, pirate basically. There's never
Mm-hmm.
any discussion of how One-Eyed Willie got the treasure or where it comes from, and it's like, I mean, we'll save to what you get to it, right? But so they're going on a treasure hunt. And this also, like, this was really promoted to us, this idea of like sort of treasure hunting, and to the extent that I actually at one point bought a metal detector. And I wasn't the first person in my friend group to have one. Like I had other friends with them. And like and I had to say, like, it was the worst, like, there's different things that you do as a child growing up, to pass the time or whatever. There is nothing more boring in the world than going out with a metal detector and trying to find, something of value. 99% of the time, I mean, most of the time, you're not going to find anything at all. And you're just gonna be walking around with this stupid thing on your arm, listening to a lack of beeps or some beeps or whatever. Um, but if you do find something, it's gonna be some like teenager's necklace from Claire's, or a set of 50-cent $2 earrings that they didn't care enough about, that they just left when they lost it, right? And so it's it is terrible, and I did it, like, I don't know, maybe as many as 10 times, but also, like, a lot of the places that you would do it, like, you really do have to go to, like, a beach, which I didn't live near a beach, you know, maybe, like, a public park or something like that. Like, you have to go someplace where people repeatedly gather, that they might lose something that is of value. And, the notion that you're gonna find like a diamond ring or something like this, right? That is like it's like you're not. You're not. And but this is, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of, people are making jokes about Antique Roadshow and stuff like that in the chat. I mean, like, you know, this is very much still a project of promoting these ideas of, oh, like you could just find, like, the whole notion of like thrift store, finding these treasures that somebody's just going to throw something out or put in a store that has more value. I mean, yeah, like, it's true, you can make a little bit of money if you're savvy and you put a lot of, you know work into learning this stuff, right? To be able to go someplace and recognize. But like that information is, especially at this point in time, is so publicly available that the people that are running these stores also know the value most of the time of what they have, right? And even still, like in order to do it on a level where you could actually like run a business or make money off of it, you need so much capital, right? To be able to like constantly buy stuff, put it somewhere where it becomes inventory to wait for it to be sold for the price so you can realize the gain on it. There's so much labor and money that has to go into that. I know I'm going off the tangent into like treasure hunting and all this stuff, but I mean, this is a movie about treasure hunting on some level. And obviously, none of us are going to find a fucking pirate ship with like $1 billion in gold and diamonds in it. Like, that's a ridiculous fantasy, right? But you're kind of encouraged. And I think, again, to your point, this is like, it's to create this kind of like, more than anything, it sort of reinforces this, mythology around like really capitalism and entrepreneurship or whatever, right? Of just like, you got to figure out a way. You got to figure out a way to work harder, do something as an individual to like make your money, to get your treasure, right? And in the 80s, this is often kind of like the form that this stuff took, is just like, oh, you're going to find some kind of treasure. Um, and if you did, right, it's something that was stolen from other people, and there's no discussion of that either. So yeah, anyway.
So there's this documentary called Loot. It's from like 2008. I saw it a long time ago. I can't speak on how good it is because it's been a while since I've seen it. Though the subject is very interesting. It's about World War II veterans who basically relooted Nazi stuff that they looted from Jewish people and basically hid it to basically come back later to go get it. And this is a big thing. People don't even know about this. This is actually a thing that happens in wars a lot. You have it happen in multiple, right? And the guy follows these older World War II veterans who basically go back, and they're using like their metal detectors, like to try to find out where the stuff is and all that. And he asks them in the movie, the director, like, are you going to return this to the people it's stolen from? And they were looking at it like, huh? You know what I'm saying? They're like, huh?
Finders
like,
keepers, losers sweepers.
Exactly. But that's the mentality, like, because so the context of this movie, because like what happens is the kids are in there, and like I said, all the tropes play out, right? They manipulate Chunk into breaking the frame that has the map in it, so he breaks it. They call him, and Mouth is messing around, so sticking his tongue and stuff. Like all this stuff is constantly happening, right? So we see Sean Astin's character. He grabs the map, right, and he can't read it, so they make Mouth translate. Now that's been established, and they begin talking about One-Eyed Willie, right? And Sean Astin's character is Mikey, right? Right.
He goes on this unfortunate name for a pirate ever.
No.
One-Eyed Willie.
One-Eyed Willie. What a terrible fucking name. But he tells like the old story of One-Eyed Willie, and it's like I think it's like the British Armada. He basically like has this stuff, and it's his, and they're Mikey loves One-Eyed Willie. Willie is like amazing. He is like the shit. Right. And like it's the British Armada who are stealing from him. They corner him and they're stealing from him. And we should already know how fucking absurd that is, and this is what I really loved about the book, How to Read Donald Duck, because they have a whole chapter on Disney and treasure, and that really establishing that before colonialism, really everything is prehistory, right? So pretty much there is no claim to anything before Europe carved up the world, right? So in that kind of calculus, the pirate could also be actually probably has more claim than like the British state, right? Because the pirate was the first person to basically go out. They were doing this before the state decided to go out, or the nations started to go out and do it, right? So it's really the pirates, right, who are the real owners of all these resources, which they then renamed to be treasures, right? And even like the idea of treasure, because a treasure is something that you find, right? And then so it's like it basically is doing the job of making us misunderstand what resources that come from lands that have natural sovereignty, right? They don't like. We can go. Let's just go. Think about what Trump is doing right now with Iran, right? Like, where do you think these mentalities come from? They come from this shit, right? Right? It is this, right? So this concept is imperialist, like at its core, right? This is like how like the thing is set the fuck up. And like I'm watching it, I'm going, yes. So this is like the ground zero. All that stuff is pre-history. So where the kids get the idea is like, oh, wait a minute. We can save ourselves if we can be like Willie. So the pirate becomes their archetype of like salvation. And it's like, and I guess in a weird way, the rich people become like the British, which, you know, not in a weird way. It's actually probably real. The rich people become like the British, which for American colonialism is the negative force, right? Because we liberated ourselves, not we, the white people did, but quote unquote Americana, you know, freed ourselves from no King's Day, right? You know, like from the British, so forth and so on, from monarchical rule, and then there you go, right? And this is the colonial mentality, right? And this is how they're able to kind of stamp it, and now they're bringing it through kids, right? Because I think Romancing the Stone is like a year or two before this, right? But this stuff predates all like the Alan, you know, we can talk about all the comic books and the other movies that happened before this type of stuff, right? But it's like
Indiana Jones is also
Indiana Jones, right? Indiana Jones, yeah, same thing, right? So there's tons of stuff that's been doing this, but yeah, now the Goonies becomes, you know, kids Indiana Jones in that way, but with pirates instead of him going to lands, you know, an actual world, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, Indiana Jones is more obvious in terms of like, I mean, it's a justification for a more obvious form of imperialism, right? Whereas this is like trying to create multiple layers of kind of that you have to kind of go through. It's obviously a direct justification of imperialism and settler colonialism, but at the same time, like that justification is sort of laundered through a couple of different layers of obfuscation, right? Of this idea of like, okay, well, the pirate, and I mean, there's interesting literature, you know, Marcus Rediker, others like about pirates and class politics and pirates and so on and so forth. But like fundamentally, you know, what we're talking about in this instance, like we're talking about these like cut diamonds and gold coins, right? All this stuff, like this is like probably at least twice or three times stolen, you know, indigenous resources, right? National sovereignty of, you know, although, you know, even nation is not really like the category back then, but right, like the sovereign resources of South America and, you know, North America and so on and so forth, right? Yeah. And it's all just sitting in a fucking cave in Oregon, which Oregon does have caves. So you never know. Maybe there's a
cave. We get to that part. It's gonna be hilarious. I started cracking up. I was like, it's been sitting there intact, hanging. You know what I'm saying? Like all this time, your salvation, right? So yeah, this activates like the kids, even the brother, to basically be like, oh, you know what? Let's, you know, this is very interesting. And then what they do in like classic like storytelling is they bring in the complications. So they have to go back downstairs, and you see Troy, who gets invoked. We'll talk about, and his father. Oh no, it's not Troy and his father. It's the father and his business partner. They serve them the papers or something like that. Basically letting them know that tomorrow it's like the end, and then you have like the big emotional music that's like really terrible in the movie. The music really got to me, right? To kind of begin to set you up with like you're gonna have to start like, you know, understanding that, they're at this like nexus point and they have to kind of make a decision, which they then do. Cause then the big decision becomes the kids are like, we're going to go look for the treasure. Right. And they're going to tie up Bran, played by Josh Brolin. And then the kids go off on their bikes. And now the adventure begins. Right. Of where they're going to go find, the other thing we didn't mention is Chunk brings in the Fratellis that he's heard about it and all that type of stuff. But, we'll get to that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, Peter Linebaugh was the other author I was actually thinking about, which Josh Mofwa Paul mentioned also in the chat. So yeah, there's interesting work around that, around piracy and all of that. So what do we want to? I mean,
they go on what's their important journey. because they go on their journey. Like Bran is like following them. Like it's very adventure-y throughout the entire movie at this point. I mean, and like it's just and gag and thing it at one after another. So we gotta, I guess, pick point what we think is like relevant to really dig into. I don't know where.
I mean, one thing to just say is like this notion. I mean, actually, one of the least realistic elements of this early part for me was the mother telling Josh Brolin's character, like, don't let your brother go outside. Like, like
because he has asthma. That's like one of the things we didn't establish because he has. No, I'm saying because he has asthma. Like I'm putting it as a question. Yeah,
he has a pump. Like I mean, like kids, kids just went outside. Like so I say that because sometimes younger folks watch. They said that I heard people say this about Stranger Things, and so on and so forth. Like to a younger generation, it can be hard for some of them to imagine that your parents just let you go out into the world, right, to go on an adventure. Like that part seems to have some like it seems actually for a lot of younger people beyond kind of their suspension of disbelief. And all I am here to say to you is we absolutely did that shit. Like, and it was wild. And all of our parents nowadays, probably people would say that they were neglectful or whatever, right? But that was just what people did in the 80s, and even in cities, of course, too. I'm sure you can attest. Like, but like especially in the country, just going off and like exploring. I mean, you were told certain thing, watch out for certain people, certain folks' property, like this kind of thing, because there were people that didn't want kids just wandering off in their area or whatever else. But like just going off with your buddies and going outside and exploring, if you lived in a place like Oregon or a lot of other places in the country, that was just what people did. And so a movie like this also like gave you something of like kind of a fantasy to attach to that, right? Of like, oh, we're gonna go out looking for shit, like maybe we'll find, whatever. I mean, actually where I grew up, which is interesting to think back on now, sometimes we were looking for arrowheads, right? Which obviously is a direct understanding of the indigenous past of the place as well. But
yeah. So the bike riding leads them to the Fratelli's hideout, which they don't know is the Fratelli's hideout. And that becomes like the next like kind of like point. And Mikey's brother, Josh Brolin, is like following him. He has a moment with like it's where you get to meet Andy and Steph, right? Because he's with Troy and he gets embarrassed because he failed his driver's test, and there's like the scene where he gets like his hailed. I think Troy drives like a 5.0. I think is the car. It's like a red 5.0, and he like gets him to like fly off into the bushes. I'm like, first of all, he'd been much more fucked up if that happened. Like on a tricycle, like his ass would have been like totally messed up, right? But they get
It's
to
a
the
bike with
Fratelli.
it's a bike with training wheels.
Training wheels, right? Yeah, exactly. It's like it's terrible, right?
That
And
he
then
steals from a little girl.
girl, I know. I think it's supposed to be like Data's sister because I think she looked like she looks Asian. So I was like, I think it's Data's sister. So they get to the Fratelli's hideout, and when they're there, they see a couple of men walk in, right? And then they hear gunshots, right? And they have like this little like thing where they're starting to do like the kind of like search for the treasure. So like they're like combining the Fratelli's stuff with the like the treasure hunt, right? And it like leads them to go into the Fratellis. And this is the thing I'm like watching this movie. I'm like, this is a kids movie, right? We're hearing like gunshots, people getting shot up. I'm like, okay, wow, okay, interesting. So they get to the Fratelli's hideout, right? And it's like a dump, and you begin to like see Mama Fratelli and her kind of craziness, and like she's like she threatens to like to cut out the tongue of Corey Feldman, maybe want his tongue, right? I can't lie though, she's really good in this role. Like on like a performance tip, like the three of them, like as badly written as it is, they're very fun in how they do it, right? Like Joey Pozzoliano is very good at being a kind of like a dummy who always gets like like fucked over from like and like Bound. It was like that. He's always really good at that. He has like a good he's good at like not taking himself seriously in a role that he can constantly look like a fool. But on the flip side, I got to give it to Robert Davi because like he's always played like this like a super cool dude, right? And he uses it, but then he looks like a dummy, like also. So he plays it really well when they have their fights, right? And his singing, him singing opera constantly, right? Doing these things but they get into like that the place is like this like weird stuff, and then you start hearing the sounds as well, right? Right, the sounds of the place, which like begins to kind of bring in Sloth eventually, right? But they want their thing is they know that the way to the treasure is through there, so they have to somehow get by the Fratellis. But Chunk also knows because he sees the bullet holes in the car that if the Fratellis are there and that these people are dangerous, right? So this is where you get like the big kind of antagonistic like nexus of the movie of like they're going to go on the treasure hunt, but there's like these killers who are there, which is like very old school adventure movie, right? You have to make a complication for the adventure that is not necessarily part of the adventure. It's like a kind of like added element, right? But then it kind of like helps feed it. It's very Sid Field writing bullshit.
Yeah.
Yes,
National for folks who haven't seen this movie, like a more common or more not, I mean, it's not recent at this point, but like the National Treasure movies follow the same exact kind of, setup and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing quickly, I always was like, can't they just sell the gold doubloon? Like that thing probably is worth enough money to maybe
but
not.
They gotta get the ship, man. But all because it's about being Willie. I mean, I think that's like I do really think that's it. It's like because then like as the movie goes on, like you see Mikey, like he has these conversations with Willie, like him and Willie talk to each other. Willie, what are you doing? Are you testing us? And I'm like, oh my God. I'm sorry, if that was my friend, I'd be like, homie, I'm going home, bro. And they do it like several times in the movie, but I would have been the one who's like, bro, I'm going home. You talking to people in the middle of a waterfall? Like this is a bit much.
And I only brought up the doubloon because the folks, it has holes in it, and they use that as well as the map to like figure out like this is where we're supposed to go at these different points of the thing, whatever. So yeah, they go in there,
and then they go in there, and then eventually, so this is where they kind of complete it because Josh Brolin gets in there. Right, he's basically been following him. He follows him to it, right? And then you get the young women come in, Steph and Andy, right? And we should probably get into them now as characters. So Andy's kind of set up that like I guess she's dating Troy, or like kind of Troy's the rich kid who's like his father is the dude who's going to take over the town, or the representative, right? But she's also like I guess going to go on a date with Josh Brolin's character. So like she seems to more organically like him, and it's also set up that Troy is terrible because then she leaves. He has Troy's sweater on, but she's left Troy because from the moment in the car, because he was like looking down her skirt and stuff like that, and she smacked him in the lip, she says, right? And the thing to kind of establish about the two of them is just like this is like a very like similar thing you see in movies when they deal with young women, right? Where you have like the very sexualized and kind of one, and also the one who's sexualized, but who also kind of wants it also. There's like this constant thing with Andy, like always wanting to hook up. And that like Josh Brolin's the more rational one, and she's like the more like irrational one, which like is really fucked up coded if you think about what actually happens in reality, right? You know, like it's just it's the fantasia of these men, right? Her skirt's very high throughout the whole movie too, right?
She's a cheerleader. She wants to
cheerleader.
be like it's always between the cheerleader trope is always like between the kind of like I mean the rich asshole, right? And then like the working class or poor, like
Yeah.
you know, ethical, moral, you know,
Yeah.
guy, but he's poor, so do you really want to be with him? You know that.
Yeah, he doesn't have a car, right? The first thing she does, she invites him to sit with Troy in the car, right? But then you have Martha Plimpton's character, who is like the opposite. She's totally desexualized, right? Right? She has glasses, right? But like it's not in a way to kind of like make her like if they're doing a good thing, they're making her unattractive, right? And undesirable, right? And she's like the friend. She kind of like chastises in a funny way her friend constantly for being, you know, so into boys. And she's also very tough, right? So she's always constantly like, fighting with mouth or these people, so forth and so on. There's like another big point that I had with it. What was it? The other thing is, as you see throughout the movie, is that like the hysterics, like they really have Andy like they have that scene where she's like really hysterical talking about her like her body and I don't have a beautiful body, and I'm like, this is just really weird. Like, and the friend can't control her. She's like the only one who like really gets angry with mouth, not Andy, Steph, right? And it's a device that they do. They talk about this when you want to create a character who becomes like the desired one. You have to make, if there's like only two of you, or it could be seen as a threat, you have to make the other one undesirable, right? So they actually had to drain, quote unquote, desire from Steph's character in order to make Andy seem that much more like, basically she's like the only one in town, and like anyone would be lucky to get her. And this person, this kind of representational of a young woman could not be desirable, except at that moment at the end where she has with Mouth. But then even Mouth still kind of like, it's like a backhanded compliment, you know? And it's very weird, and it's very typical of how they kind of paint young women in movies of this. I mean, still till now, but definitely of that era, right? And it's like you're bringing that into it. And I was watching it this time, just thinking, and she has short hair too. Is the other one? That was the other one that I forgot. Is like her short hair. I mean, like it's like what a costume and production and the design is what they think about. It's kind of how they kind of like make these things happen visually.
Yeah, and like, I mean, the only thing I add is like she just sort of like comes off like obviously she has like she could be skeptical of things or whatever, but she comes off bossy, right? Like it's like this thing, like
Bossy.
like yeah, and so she comes off just like, yeah. I mean, it's intentional, and it's again like it's kind of like this anti-feminist, you know, I think propaganda of the period as well, you know, for both of the characters, right? The one that is desirable is Andy, you know, and she's just kind of like boy crazy, over sexualized, all this kind of stuff, right? And then you have the desexualized, bossy, you know, that nobody really likes, just unlikable kind of, and stuff.
Yeah. And they kind of play, especially early, making her unlikable, right? She complains about like having to babysit kids, you know, like they just make her kind of like it is a really like just like negative complainer, right? And like it's just, you know, It's just part of the trope. So but then they become part of the group, right? And like it just becomes a big thing. Like this is the group that's going to go down, and through like a series of like things with the Fratellis and them like discovering like they keep going further downstairs, right? Right. They lead as the Fratellis are like moving body bags, right? Really of like the two people they just killed or one of them into like their car, I guess to like throw them in the river or something like that. And they eventually get downstairs, right? There's like the scene with Chunk and the "It's so stiff." I always remember that line in my head because I'm saying Chunk sounds like he's from Brooklyn, like all the time. It's so stiff. It's just
Yeah.
like
Nobody
all the
ever
time.
talked like that in Oregon in their life.
I'm sure not. And that's probably why like Chuck was the character that I like listened to the most because I'm like, oh yeah, we would say that it's a stiff, right? But that's like the other thing. Like there's like a guy with a bullet hole in his head, cold, right? This is a kid's movie. I'm watching it like I was like 7 years old watching movies about dead bodies in the refrigerator.
It'd be really interesting, like, as we get to the 90s, like, it'll be really interesting to track, like, when did the sanitization that we are so accustomed to nowadays, like, really start to take hold, Because it
Yeah.
just you wouldn't have this level of stuff, like, I mean, there's plenty of movies that kids wanna watch and that are kind of marketed to kids nowadays that have a PG-13 rating that
Yeah.
do a lot of this, but, like, in the 80s, it was literally like, just like, no, like, this is just for kids. Like,
This is just for kids. Yeah, we're gonna have that, right? We're gonna have dead bodies, right? And then is Sloth is after this part, or is he before it? I can't remember. Well, I think
so
Sloth was
you,
before it.
yeah, you get, because the family starts to interact with
Yes, that's what it
Sloth,
is.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, like then you have the other kind of like big. Yeah, that's a big element of the movie. Is you find out there is a third Fratelli brother, um, and he's like a deformed monster that they have chained and caged in the basement and like feeding him the food and like the older brother played by Davi, he's like constantly like berating him for not eating the food and stuff like that. And like it's just like another kind of entry to the way. It's weird because you know what it is, it's like for me, Jay, when I watched it, it's like a combo of like two kind of things. It's like definitely like what they want us to think about criminals or like how to characterize a criminal, that like when you really get behind them, they got slaves and demons and things like that. But it also kind of harkens back, which I think was worth for this movie, to kind of like the old ways that they thought of like the poor or the lumpen, or like or even pre like industrial times, like peasants and serfs and things like that, that they had like deformed creatures for children and things like that. And like because they set up later that the mother, I guess, dropped the kid a bunch of times, and that's why he's deformed, right? Right. So this idea of like kind of like careless underworld people, right? And this is like kind of what the underworld is like. And it does harken back to like old British shit that you would hear. It's like some Game of Thrones weirdness, right? To me, like the the dregs of society have these like things in their basements, right? And like right, and it's like a night, it's like a not a nice, a very nasty marriage of like old ways of thinking with like how do you apply that to like the new or current criminality of the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, it's just deeply ableists, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that too.
like, you
Yeah.
can't, like, I mean, and the way that a character like Sloth then becomes, I think, also license again. And we talked about like all the sort of ways that, mouth becomes a license for, racism and stuff like that in certain ways with the way he talks, right? Like that. Um, you know, I just think Sloth became this like kind of way that people then mimicked what they felt about people who had disabilities of
Yep.
different kinds, right? Um, And yeah, I mean, it's
It's noble.
complicated in
It's
certain
noble
respects.
savagery too. It's definitely noble
Yeah,
savagery,
yeah,
right? Because then
yeah,
Sloth ends up being the most genuinely giving
right.
person, even though even at the end he saves his evil family.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's also, I mean, there's elements of that too, of like the way that I remember people talking about folks with like Down syndrome, for instance, or
Yeah,
whatever, of like they're so
yeah.
caring, they're this, that, like, you know, this kind of thing. And so there's just it, you can't get around like the ableism of the representation and it being like such a big, you know, screen product with all of the kind of cultural cachet that it had. Um,
And still has. I mean, there's Sloth
yeah.
is like, I mean, he's kind of like a mascot of a particular like for like people who love 80s movies as like a brand and like a kind of like cultural touchstone. He's a mascot of that. Like Sloth, right? Sloth t-shirts, right? It's like a thing, right? And he's like one of the like the totems of that. And it's, I mean, but you're right. So then when you put it through like the lens of everything you just said, it just becomes more ugly, right? But then also characterizes as, like you said, the ableist way that we think about and we engage, you know? It's just, yeah. So yeah, as like the movie kind of goes, they eventually get themselves underground. They realize that like they have to go underground, right? And there's like a series of mishaps. It's always until this point, it's always Chunk. Chunk drops the water. They, and I got it, I don't got it. And they call him a klutz, right? And it breaks and the water goes down. So they all begin to like head down, except for Chunk, because Chunk gets locked in the closet with the stiff, right? And you know, um, and they begin to head down into the basement, which is like the lead way to the passageway to go find the treasure. Because the other thing is like there's this guy, Chester Copperpot, who was like did it before, who like, he was like the previous treasure hunter, I think in like the 30s, I think it is. He was the last person to kind of seek this out. So they're kind of also following his trail that he had kind of like set. So they're kind of following his lead, quote unquote, to kind of go see what they have. Yeah, I don't know.
Not much more
Anything.
on that. I mean, from there, you get into obviously they become separated, right? So like
Right.
because Chunk gets left behind and the Fratellis come back and
Yep.
so they get away, but Chunk doesn't get away, he gets captured. And so then there's all the scenes of like, you know, basically threatening, they want to put him in a blender,
Yeah.
like his fingers in a blender and all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff, right? Torture and get information out of him.
Yeah. And
Um,
like I
which
want to say one
Yeah,
thing
go ahead.
about those chunk scenes actually. So those chunk scenes are interesting because this is where you kind of what I was talking about before. It kind of gets like up the ante up because the first thing he does is what? He calls the cops. And he tells them like I'm in the basement of the Fratellis. So the cop says to him, "Oh, this is like the time you told me this. This is the time you told me that." So he is that like liar, right? And that's what I'm saying. That's where I'm coming back to like those old tropes, right? And look, I'm sure there'll be someone say, "Well, Spielberg's Jewish. He would, da, 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 da." But look, to say that Jewish people, like all other groups, don't have the ways that they separate the different kind of sections of their culture is to not be, it means you actually haven't like engaged with any Jewish history, right? And even literature, right? Stuff like that, like how they talk about stuff, right? And sometimes critically of that. The people who did like the critical stuff of like looking at how Jewish people characterize each other, right? And this is totally kind of falls into that kind of like vibe, right? Because then the cops won't believe him because he's always been a liar. So then he goes outside to the street, right? And he's like waving. There's also a shot that felt really dangerous of like him on like the road with like the car. I was like, oh my God, that just feels really dangerous, but that's just me. It's maybe it's a good shot in that kind of way. But he gets out, and of course on the road he basically says everything, and of course it's the Fratellis, right? And he's dude is singing, and they take him in. And he has to do his big confessional, right? And he, I mean, it sucks because like it's so tropish, but like it is the only thing that is funny about it is they say tell him everything. He goes, everything, right? And he basically starts from like the beginning of his life, and he basically like divulges his life story about all the kind of bad things he's done. It's like a confessional of his existence, but also like where it's not where it's immediately not funny when you watch it is what he says, like, you know, stuff around food, that he can't control his food. He got kicked out of fat camp because he I think he found some food and he ate all of it, right? I mean, it's like, it's bad, right? And it's just like he's like the dominant, him and Data are like the dominant comic relief of the movie, right? And Sloth actually eventually too. Yeah, yeah, they become like the dominant comic relief of the movie by this point. I mean, Chunk throughout and Data throughout, but then Sloth becomes like the additional, right? Especially when Sloth and Chunk become one, which I think is also the really interesting thing that I brought up before, which like happens like in the next scene because they basically chain Chunk in the room with Sloth.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and then I don't know. I mean, you get to a lot of the kind of, you know, I guess the best way to characterize it is like, in the Indiana Jones movies, right? There's
Yeah,
always like you get into these spaces where there's treasure, and of course there's all kinds of booby traps. And I always am like, I mean, this is such a curious thing to me. I'm like, who is spending all of this time setting up these elaborate, like who had the time to figure out like how to like uh you know get boulders to roll down, these hills, and spikes to fly out and all of this stuff. I don't know. Anyway, so like that you get all of that, right? Like it is very Indiana Jones-esque in terms of the Goonies going into this cave and having to navigate traps and puzzles, right? This is
right.
always the thing. I mean, it's like, again,
Traps and
National
puzzle,
Treasure is another movie. Yeah,
yeah, and then also
does
like
all
their
that.
emotions with each other. So like
Hmm.
they like so like all their interpersonal shit comes around, right? Right? Like Allie getting into like a hysteric. She wants to kiss, Josh Brolin, and she ends up kissing Sean Astin, which is a weird scene. Um, you know, and but then or like Mouth and Steph getting into an argument at the wishing well, right? And then there's also the stuff like they're underground. There's like the very famous scene where they mess with the pipes, right? And like it infringes upon the country club, and then you get Troy to get his embarrassment on the toilet where he shoots him up and he goes, "Daddy!" You're right, it's like you get your emotional fun to like make fun of the rich kid for a moment. Yeah, the big rocks, but like the thing that I thought about, I was like, this is where like the other is, it's like how to read Donald Duck thinking for me again. It's like, okay, so let's say Willie did do this. Let's just take this on good faith. How did he do it? He got all his men, who they say he later killed, to do it. So basically, he was like a slave driver, right? He was an asshole who wanted to keep shit for himself, and he probably, through the threat of gun and the whip, right, made these motherfuckers hang all this shit up. Because I know Willie wasn't doing this shit by himself, right? Like he wasn't sitting up there, yeah, you guys chill. I'm about to go, get some big ass rocks up so I could drop on people so they could go get shit. Like so they can't get shit. Like, come on. But the other thing about it is like the hoarding aspect of it, right? And that it's like celebrated as like a good thing. Like steal your shit and hoard that shit, right? And protect it at all costs. I mean, that's very libertarian, to be honest with you. Right? Like there's a dude who lives up here. He has like a compound up in the Bronx. It's wild. And he has like, don't come near my shit, right? And he has like the gun fucking, this is the Bronx too, which is wild. But like, it's that mentality. It's like, yeah, dude, don't come for my shit. I stole it. I didn't steal it. I found it. And if you come here and if you can get past it, I bet. But if you can't, you know what I'm saying? Your ass deserves to get smashed by a rock.
Yeah. I mean,
It's nuts.
it's really just for the movies, to have like it's how do you create, an adventure. I mean, it's got to be in one of these books that you're talking about too, in terms of like how to do this shit, right? Of like, oh, like you create a bunch of puzzles and traps and all this stuff. And like, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? Because like the amount of resources even that would go into it. I mean, JMP in the chat, said like, why wouldn't it just be in a vault, right? Like, great question. That would be easier.
No, but it wouldn't be cinematic, right?
It
And
wouldn't
it's
be
just the
fun.
end. It would be fun, right? And you wouldn't be able to have kids, do all this stuff through like a big, like, adventurous maze. And then the other thing that begins established is the Fratellis discover that they're downstairs, right? So the Fratellis go, oh, let's go follow him down, right? And then eventually Sloth and Chunk break each other out, and they begin their friendship over a baby Ruth, which I remember that scene very like more vividly than most scenes. I don't know why. Maybe because of how it's shot with like the light. It's like it can be very like staining on the brain. And then they become like the third trailers, right? So you have like three like you have like three levels of like going through the maze, right? And Yeah, so that become like the other big thing they establish, and like the quests just keep harder and harder. One of the and yeah, we haven't brought Data up, so one of the other big things about Data constantly is that he, I think he has a moment where he like falls, but like his I guess his teeth gripping
Pinchers of power, I think they're called.
Is it pinchers? I mean, pinches of pow, right? He goes in and like And the other thing I don't like okay, I have to bring this up, and this is not about Ke Huy Quan. He's a kid, but there's a thing that they do that white directors do to, and it happens a lot with I think with Chinese people. I think is they make them speak loud and brash. So like
And in the
really like
third person.
and in the third person, right? And like to kind of play up like their natural accent and to make it sound like guttural. It's like it's part of like the primitivizing, or the word, making them more primitive, right? And like that's the thing with Data that like this like bothers me. He's like always yelling, right? I mean, he did that also, I think, in Indiana Jones, probably too, with whatever his character was, short round, right? But it's just so like he's like pictures of power, and I'm like ah, man, it's like and like I see the legacy of that in like some other like later kind of like minstrels that you see in different characters, right? And but yeah, like he uses this stuff, he's able to like kind of catch himself, so it's like it's the constant shit that like his shit doesn't really work that well, but it like works enough, right? And like it gets him out of like trouble here and there, right? And it's just yeah, it makes you think about, definitely it's the racist interpretation of like the made in China label on everything that's coming, all the goods that come your way, right? It's made by these like kind of like primitive, well-meaning, but not that smart, but smart enough to make some. It's also just chaotic thinking. I don't want to like actually make it like actually have a coherence, because it is a bit chaotic to a degree.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think this is some of the like, Asian kids are STEM kids, like,
Like the
kind of thing.
pro of it,
Um,
right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I do think the accent thing and the way that they make him talk, I do think making the minstrelsy comparison is on point. And I felt like this for a very long time, that like if you actually pay a lot of attention to Asian representation in American film, like my goodness. Like
Yeah.
we talked about this a little bit with Gemma, and she used the term inscrutability because that's kind of one of the frameworks that she works with around this. because and she talked about this a little bit, like there become forms. So if we're talking about black actors or whatever, there become forms of representation that become um you know prominent, useful, etc., right? Obviously to, you know, American capitalism and the imperialist project and neocolonialism and all those kind of things. But like you get, stuff like the Cosby Show, like all of these are very clear class projects. So I don't want to say anything like positive about them, but they are forms of representation, right? That actually
Mm.
are not quite as cartoonish and absurd, right, as what you're getting like in the images of these individual Asian characters that get dropped into these movies in the 80s and the 90s, right? Where it just you have to play this trope that is they're not only tropes, but they're like they just are like kind of just white fantasies or something like that, right? Like it's just sort of like a like where does this come from, and
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
So I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna bring in Ke Huy Quan's big comeback movie, Everything Everywhere
Right.
All at Once, which I hate. I despise that movie, and part of the reason why I'm not on Twitter anymore is because of my commentary on that movie. Because everyone wanted to come for me how much as I despised that movie. Because what it is seen as is kind of doing what you're talking about, Jay, is that because the representation of the 80s was so overtly racist, and not even as the 80s. Yeah, there's like movies like there's a movie by John Huston called Reflections in a Golden Eye. I like the movie largely, but there's a Filipino what is he? I guess it's where he's like a caretaker of one of the characters who's like depressed, and it's racist, it's homophobic, it's really really bad, right? So like they think because these qualitative shifts, right, starting from the bottom, that like it just gets better and better, but Everything Everywhere All at Once is just another series of tropes kind of put into a new rinse, right?
Yeah.
Tiger mom, right? Emasculated dad, like, and then also like we just get into just the kind of general issues of how they're dealing with the ideas of lineage, kind of making it metaphysical and so forth and so on. But this was also seen as
As
his
progress, I
role
mean,
as progress.
yeah.
And I'll say one thing, as also progress and also cleaning up the past.
Hmm.
In the progress, they actually made the past better. He got an Oscar for it,
Yep.
and he was able to, through this process, we were able to exorcise the demons of bad Asian representation that preceded
Yeah.
all the movie, but before it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to be clear too, like I I don't I don't necessarily think that having progress in these representational terms, like I think folks like yourself, Dr. Jared Ball, like many others, like have shown that there's actually so it's maybe one way to think about it is this. I'm sure there's many ways to think about it, right? But I think when we come to like this overt bad racist representation, right, which is in this instance, I mean, there is the problem of young Asian kids growing up, and like Steven said, like this was peak representation. So like then what do you then, like that sucks. Like that's the best model that you have in the period, right? And like it's not like I can point to other things in the 80s and say like, oh, it should have been this instead. Like, no. Like it's just what you had,
There
right?
were
So
no options.
that's terrible, and it also in many ways I think reinforces overt racism, right, among the white masses of like, okay, oh, you're like data, like like this, like really, right? But then there's also the problem, there's also the fact that um it's not neocolonial, it's not I can't, I mean, I don't know how to even wrestle through all the layers of this. But like part of what I would see is like there has to be some recognition that even if you like certain elements of it, that this is racist, right? Like it obviously so, right? And so then that does something different in terms of somebody's politics and relation and orientation towards Hollywood, the film, et cetera, I would think, right? Maybe it also causes you to internalize some of that racism or whatever, or like that's the best that we can offer. Like, I don't know. But then when you get to like the Cosby levels or Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or on and on, obviously it is still racist, but it is racist in a way that's really trying to like create an aspiration for you that's neo-colonial. Right? And I think that's one of the things that's like that, and so when you get to something like Everywhere All at Once, which I haven't seen, but my imagine or my fear with any project like that, right, is that it is trying to create a kind of neo-colonial, or whatever, like aspiration around a lot of this kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
anyway.
I'm gearing up soon on Within Our Gates to actually have this kind of discussion around Asian American films, especially in the last decade, right? Things like what's the Lulu Wang movie with Aquafina? This stuff like that, like the way these, because you're bringing in the Cosby kind of what you're saying, the Fresh Prince, these like qualitative shifts in that is really important because it is like the neo-colonial relationship, right? When you're in that, it's like who gets to judge the in the hegemonic order how those shifts happen, right? And you see that and how these movies like play into that. Even things that are like you can say relative The Farewell, yes, thank you. Even a movie like I do think it's a deeply problematic movie, but a movie like Minari, which was very, very celebrated a few years ago, which I think is relatively harmless, though I could see someone say maybe it is harmful in a way. I think it's relatively harmless, but it also isn't very challenging in its conversation around immigrant reality in the US. Right. Joy Luck Club. That's another big, well, yeah, well, whoa. The 90s gets real interesting. I'm gonna scale back because like this is actually big shit. And there's a lot of people who have done great film studies stuff on this. Like it's really, really interesting to think about how that representation kind of, builds, especially then also with the influx of directors from mostly from Hong Kong, but you have some from Japan, but mostly from Hong Kong coming in, and recently even Korea bringing in directors to do American movies. So most of them are doing, white movies with white people, which is also interesting. But yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's a whole lot of shit up in here, man. It's a whole lot of shit up in
Yeah.
here.
Anyway.
Yeah, I know. Good tangent
So
though. That's a tangent.
yeah.
Good further explanation.
So like what else? I mean, this is the funny thing about this movie is that like a lot of what we would want to talk about. I mean, there's gag scenes, right? There's the scene where Sean Astin, which I mean, I just for folks who I imagine everybody knows who Sean Astin is, but like
Oh
it's so
yeah,
kind of
right.
funny on some level of like, we're talking about, Frodo.
That's right. I keep forgetting
We're,
about that. Yeah, because I'm not into those movies, but I know what you mean. I always
Rudy, like
Rudy, and then also look a movie that we gotta have to do, Toy Soldiers.
yeah, like so I mean, this movie does become a launch pad. I mean, like it is the Josh Brolin thing is the most when you watch it, if you because I didn't remember that, right? Like that it was, it is like you look at him like that's fucking Josh Brolin. Like, because he
Yeah,
appears to me at like No
yeah,
Country from Old Men in a certain way as like a full adult actor without like without me necessarily remembering all of the past of him,
yeah.
you know?
Look, I did not. Maybe this was like the last time that I watched Goonies when I made the discovery because I was watching it one day going, huh? Huh? I did the Google and I was like, oh shit, that's Josh Brolin was a Goonie. Oh shit, no doubt. Yeah. It's wild, man. It's really, really wild with him. Oh, yes.
I'm sorry, I got the wrong one. That's
Bro,
right.
you're gonna
Elliot.
get the
What's
thumbs
that
down
guy's
for this
name?
episode. How dare you?
Yeah, what's the name of the dude who plays Frodo? It's yeah, Eli. What is his name?
Oh gosh, yeah, I don't.
Oh, somebody will have it in the chat. But yeah, another
He
prominent
was
child
he's
actor from the same
also
era.
in The Good Son with The Good Son. I remember him for The Good
Yes,
Son. Mm. He's another interesting. Oh, what's his name? Someone put it in the chat. We're not forgetting his name. Oh my gosh, who played? How do y'all know? Elijah Wood. Thank you,
Elijah
Elijah
Wood. There we
Wood.
go.
Yeah, he's another one. If you ever read his story about why he didn't, none of those things happened to him. He talked about it very, very like about how his mother, she knew about all the stuff that was happening, and she like really was purposeful in like not letting him go to parties, extracurricular things. He had a really, really interesting account of that era, which like also says like it was that public knowledge of what was happening to kind of like Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, and like the mother knew. You were like,
Well, yeah, and even I think probably Macaulay Culkin. I mean, I don't know how
Macaulay
much
Culkin's,
he's
yeah.
talked about all of that, but I know like when you, I remember when I don't remember what this came up. I think it was when we were talking about John Candy in one of the previous, because Macaulay
Mm-hmm.
Culkin was one of the few people. Well, no, he was one of the many people who like sort of sang John Candy's graces. But they did another movie that we'll have to do, Uncle Buck, together, and that was before he blew up with Home Alone. And he was like, he was like, John Candy would be like, "Yo, are you okay, kid? Like, are you good?" And he said that even as a young kid, like that really resonated with him because of all of the adults that were like dealing with him in this time, that just basically treated him like shit, basically, like didn't care about him at all, essentially, and yeah. And I
Mm.
don't know what else, but like just on a basic like human level of just him recognizing the amount of like exploitation that he was under at that time.
I mean, people knew, man. Like people knew, and like it's a lot. Um, so yeah, I mean, the film goes. You have like the famous Kerri Green's piano moment where they almost fall down and to their deaths, right? And
Yeah,
to
why
open the
is there a
bridge.
bone organ in the fucking cave?
Yeah.
Like,
Right, Willie. Willie's deep, bro. He can make bone organs. He can like get big out rocks. Willie's a bad dude. You know what I'm saying? Like bone organ, right? And then so yeah, which then gets them to the waterfall, which is like the thing that I was most jealous of the entire time. I maybe credit this movie for my love of water slides, which I look. I hate roller coasters. I'm too afraid of them. I get this. If you want to know one of them, May's fears and don'ts, I don't do roller coasters. I have a thing with them, right? I will do a water slide though. Fuck yeah. It's like
that's
going to Action
fascinating.
Park. Oh yes, Action Park. We man, shout out to Renee and Jared and Hiram. We were talking about Action Park when we hung out together a little while ago. Action Park came out. People have not seen that doc. Watch that shit. That shit is Northeast, man. Action Park. But yeah, I was like looking at Action Park when those kids were going down the water slide, and they go out. Of course, Mouth says, "Oh shit!" Like that's another thing with like this is a kids movie, right? Like what the fuck, dude? Like it's a trip, man. Like, and then you see the big pirate ship, which is like intact, like like it's never doesn't age today. There is no. I guess they just build shit really, really well. I love roller coasters. That's cool, Jay. I'm not shitting on
No,
them. I'm just saying
it's
I'm scared of them.
it's fascinating though too, because my wife is the exact same way. Like I hate water slides. I will say this too, and like anything to do with water, like keep it the fuck away from me for the most part. But like I will do any roller coaster, so it's like the exact opposite. But my wife is the same as you. She's like the inverse of that. So there's something interesting there. Anyway.
Oh man. Oh man. Yeah, and they get to the ship, and right, and this is where they get on the ship, and yeah, and through all of that, like I said, Mikey is like, talking to Willie, and And then they get on the ship, they can't find it at first, and eventually, they see the treasure, right? And it's also like the concept of treasure is also just interesting to me, right? Because like a lot of coins, right? Like coins, jewels, and like it's like nonsensical to me. Like, right, if you can't think too hard about it, because then you just go like, well, if it's a coin is made, right? Like people have to mint a coin, right? Like, so like this is like goes to it. It's like it's almost a confessional of what these things really are, and they don't realize it, right? That
All the
it is
gems are also like cut, like they're not.
cut,
It's not like
yeah, right. They're cut gems, like the gems you see at the end, like they're finely cut gems, right? When the young women like they find like necklaces and things and like jewels that they put on like their, they really get into it, right? And I was just like, this is a confessional of what all this process is, right? And y'all don't even realize it, in making this movie.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, I don't know. I mean, on one level, I think this. Well, there's a couple things. I mean, I do think that sometimes in our imagination of, um, indigenous populations in America, like we presume that they didn't. You know, I don't know too much about like Aztec or Mayan culture or any of these things, but I imagine that there was you know some creation of artifacts, right, out of
Mm-hmm.
um, you know precious metals and gems and things like that, right? Um, but I do think like the Spanish in particular as colonizers, right, would have done that, and but even still, like the way that the coins look, like the doubloon is the more accurate, I think, representation that they have, right, of what the gold would have likely looked like. It looks like it come fresh out of the US Mint in like 1975, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like it just rolled out. Like there's no dust. Nothing. I mean, maybe dust is a thing that would happen, or like cobwebs. Like nothing. Like nothing. Or I don't know. It's probably water. Or mist, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, like mold and shit. Like
Mold, right? Yeah, it's like, come on, dude. Sea moss. Like I don't know just something, but be somewhat creative. But
well, yeah,
you
I
know.
mean, when you're talking about Astoria, Oregon, I mean, we'd have to look this up, but my guess is that it's like wet at least. I mean, obviously it's the ocean right there and what ocean water does, but also like it's like 280 days out of the year or something like that. Like it's raining
Right.
or it's, yeah.
And what would that do to the wood of the ship? It would degrade it. I mean, even if it's like the best fucking made pirate ship ever, it would fucking degrade it. I mean, yeah. So like the kids get in it, but of course then the Fratellis come and they have the moment. Data tries to fight them and he punches himself in the face, which is classic Data. But then he's able to, but then he's able to kind of disarm them with like by accident with it. And it's like the regurgitation of the joke, right? They get them all, they tie them up, and then Josh Brolin gets to save his damsel in distress from like the drawbridge. So they're getting to like live out the fantasy, right? And then you get the famous entrance of Chunk and Sloth, the Hey You Guys, which is like probably maybe top 5 '80s movie sayings, maybe at least definitely top 10. It's one. I mean, in I'm terms in like popularity. I'm not saying that I endorse this
Yeah, it's
popularity.
like
I'm just saying,
meme, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and people just say it, right? It's like a thing. So, and he kind of comes down, and it's like the final kind of like showdown. The music by this point in the movie just got so much. I was like, they just, like filled everything with it, um, and yeah, he comes in and like it's like it is the thing, like it's chunking his sloth, It's like, he's on its back. I mean, like, it's weird, right? Like, he's on its back, right? And it kind of hangs him down. It's very, very ugly. It's very, this is, that great, European thought and so forth and so on. And then, yeah, like I forgot, they end up, like, they like, they have to get off the ship because they put like the dynamite or something like that, right? And I think it like cracks the thing that like holds it. I forgot how that happens. The
I
movie
don't
at that
remember.
point also
Yeah,
just
they
gets
make one of
so.
them. The Fratellis make one of them walk the plank, like one of the girls. I don't remember if it's
It's
Andy
Andy,
or
and then yes, Andy
yeah,
first, and she goes, and Josh Brolin saves her, and then
yeah,
she's going to make Mouth and Steph do it, and then that's when the "Hey, you guys" moment happens
right,
and the big fight. But
yeah.
then they all get off the ship, um, right, and then the Sloth, like then puts out his Superman shirt, which is really annoying, and he fight his brothers fight each other, knocks them out, right, but they eventually get off the ship. The thing is crumbling and they have to get out, right? But they're
Mhm.
mad because like the treasure is like lost. They're not gonna have the treasure, and they get out, and then they're right there. They're just back to the coast. They're just back home to the coast, where right at the beach where they didn't start, but where we visually start. It's like a visual reference point of the movie. That beach, which they give us early to understand. So we're basically back to that like point that's early in the movie, and I find it hilarious. I mean, I know it's a jump cut, but then like when they get out, they first see it's like the two cops are, I guess, are looking for them. The kids have gone missing, right? So the cops are there, and then suddenly they have this like big chunk cut of like the parents coming in like a big ass truck, right? To come like all greet their kids. And I think this is like part of like what I was talking about earlier. It becomes the thing of these like small town families, like they're the most loving. Like none of them like yell at their kids, like, that really like stood out to me. Like, there's no like admonishing, like, what the fuck were you doing? How dare you? They're all like, I missed you so much, and they're all like, hugging them. There's like a scene with like Data and his dad where like they have this like really loving moment where like he talks about how he's like his best invention. His dad is also makes gadgets that don't work. Right, he tries to do a thing with his camera, and it explodes. It doesn't work, and everyone thinks it's funny and cute, right? um uh Chunk's mom brings him a Domino's pizza. I mean, it's like, like
Product placement.
yeah, but the way he does, oh ma, like the way he speaks, I'm just like, I'm sorry, dog. I was like, where are you from, Cobble Hill, bro? Like, this is not Oregon,
It's a very good. Also, is a very good question as to whether Astoria, Oregon, had a Domino's in 1985. Like, I would wager no, but it's
No.
possible. But like a lot of places in, yeah, we had
Yeah.
one. We had one Domino's in Medford in 1985, and Medford is
Yeah.
bigger than Astoria, so I don't know.
Yeah. And then, yeah, so you get the whole stuff where they're like loving the family, and then like, Mikey Sack is like, he didn't get the treasure, so nothing's gonna be. And of course, who's waiting there is Troy and his dad, right? To like, sign the papers, right? And then, cut shot, there's a woman, Latin domestic worker speaking in Spanish that no one can understand, in hysterics because she's found some jewels, and it ends up being the jewels, which, like, I have to say, even as a kid, I was never fully convinced like those were the jewels that was going to save them. I was like, what are these little ass things? These look like trinkets that I could get. That I can
Yeah.
get over.
How much money are you actually getting from these jewels?
Yeah, like,
They
is that
look
like.
like plastic. Yeah, like they come when my son goes to the dentist, they give him a token at the end that he can put into one of those like old gumball machines
Yeah.
basically, and out comes a plastic jewel that looks like the jewels that are given out in the Goonies
Yeah.
at the end.
Is it a Jolly Rancher? Like, what the fuck is going on? Like, it just looked really annoying, right? And then, and then of course, this is Hollywood, right? Because his immediate calculus that this is going to basically save everyone. We're never going to sign it, and ever again. And he throws up the papers, and it's a nice shot of the papers going in the sky. And then they get interviewed by the news and so forth. One interesting thing that I found out that I always wondered about is a moment I think Chunk mentions, or no, maybe it's Data mentions an octopus. So I always took it as like they were like lying. They were like kind of like bigging up the story. But actually, in the actual film, it's a cut scene. They had a scene with an octopus, but they said it just wasn't shot very well, and they didn't get good. Like it's just it was a badly made scene, so they had to cut it. But I've always thought, I was like, oh, why are they lying? They had like I was like, that's why it seemed like that. The actual octopus was actually in the original cut of the movie. It just wasn't very good. Yeah, and then you see the ship at the end, and it sails off.
And the ship supposedly, like, there was like some discussion, I guess, that Spielberg kept the ship a secret from all the actors.
Donner said that. He said that he said that shot where they see it is actually the first time that they've seen it.
Yeah. And supposedly Josh Brolin just started cursing, like, holy fuck. And then so they had to cut it. And so it was it was unfortunate for Spielberg because he wanted this big, like, oh, they're gonna be so surprised. And Brolin just let out a curse, a string of obscenities, basically. Yeah.
And then that's the Goonies, right? That's the end of the movie. Oh, the Fratelli. Yeah. Oh, and the other big thing is that Sloth goes home with Chunk.
Yeah. And I mean, yes, right. I mean, and I do think it's important to just talk about the resolution, right? Because again, you have real class conflict in the film. You have real, wealthy developers who want to make a golf course for the bourgeoisie, right, at the expense of these working class and poor kids that live in the Goondocks, right? They're going to be displaced. They're not going to be around each other anymore. They're probably going to be in different places. That's what this all is about, is like their kind of last hurrah of like, let's go on an adventure and see if we can figure out a way to make enough money to save our houses. And this is dealt with through this magical idea of finding a fucking pirate ship with treasure in it. It's the way that you're going to deal with it, right? And this is what we are encouraged to do in America, right? In this settler colony, in this empire, is that if you are going to lose your house, like, you have to find some treasure, or you have to figure out how to do capitalism better yourself, right? You have to figure out, like, and it's all I mean, I think a lot of people, I think Jared Ball's work around Black capitalism and around buying power and stuff like that, like, these are the kind of myths that they feed us, is that like you just have to do better as being, following these bourgeois, settler colonial imperial dreams for yourself. And so fuck Steven Spielberg for that, like.
Yeah, and to that point, it also proves that like that order of people had no answers, and they still don't. I mean, it's like one of the, like, when I speak to someone who still kind of believes in capitalism, or like even like a certain level of like private property relations or some shit like that, right? I always kind of go back to this point, is like, when has there ever really been like a real solution under this system of like, social relations? Like, really, like, me having to hunt for and become Working Girl, or Strictly Business, or any of these, or The Goonies, or any film that has a thing about striking it rich, or some kind of calculus that I was able to kind of figure something out, right? Even those films, if you think about them, they do acknowledge that there are winners and losers, right? It's just that it's so focused on the winner in this moment, right? You don't think about the losers. So I was like, how is this a solution for like the collective of people who are like struggling? It's not.
No.
And it never has been. So like this idea that, I'm just not getting the point is just factually incorrect. Like it's just like you don't actually have a real argument at all, right?
Yeah.
Even the movies that you love, that you praise, that you really get into, that you even see as inspirational. Because that's like the other thing is these things get like Secret of My Success. That's another big 80s one, which we have to do, right? Like seen as inspirational. They're just cope.
Yeah.
Or meant to be cope.
Yeah, and I mean, on one level we could say, well, at least the Goonies band together, right? Like this is like one, at least they participate in a collective project, but the collective project is trying to find a pirate ship. So there's that. But I also think nowadays, what's interesting about this is like if you made a film like this nowadays, like the argument would be like one of the Goonies saying, "Guys, but so rather than a golf course, what they'd build is condos, right?" And one of the Goonies who would be like, "Look, guys, we need more housing stock. Like we're getting displaced because there's not enough housing in Astoria. So we need the condos so that us as poor people can move into cheaper housing somewhere else, because if we add more housing stock, it's going to lower the price of our housing. We're getting priced out by the market. So you would have the YIMBY, DSA member Goonie who would tell you that the condos were really good for us, even though we're losing our housing now.
DSA Goonies. Yo. What there's been these long rumors that there's gonna be a Goonies too. You've heard about that, right? It's like been long rumored. It was actually apparently greenlit, I think a couple of years ago. I don't know if it'll ever happen. I actually hope not. But like, yeah, I know it's something that they're thinking of. So maybe that's what we'll get. We'll get the DSA Goonies. We'll get the. I can't. I can't. Will not be attending the chat.
You don't want the YIMBY DSA Goonie? All right.
No. I don't even think the YIMBY DSA people really want it either. Anyway, it's a joke. Anyway,
Well, they might.
They might. I'm actually lying. I'm totally wrong on that one. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, we could close, but yeah, it's just it's wild to walk back to this movie and just think about childhood, the way this helps frame the way we think about a lot of stuff, and like just the early days of like kind of getting you to kind of understand like what the stakes of America is and kind of how you have to play it, find your treasure.
Yeah. Yeah, and the only reason I brought up that point, because I think one of the things that's like maybe obvious within this film, right, is there is like this understanding that the rich developer that wants to displace, that is like actually the central conflict. It is the villain in a certain way, right? Troy and his father, right? Obviously you have the Fratellis, but in many ways the great villain within the film is the developers. Like,
no, they are. They're the force. Like and I don't mean like Star
violence,
Wars. Yeah.
Yeah, their violence is exported upon the Fratellis, right? They're these are the people who actually enact the violence in the film, but like the displacement and all of that comes from them.
I mean, the Fratellis are essentially like another obstacle. They're kind of like side by side with the booby traps, but an evil side of the booby traps. They're an obstacle, but the villain is the corporate people.
Yeah, but I mean, like nowadays, I feel like they wouldn't even allow the conflict to kind of be set up on those terms, because the developer would be the good guy who wants to increase the housing stock in Astoria.
Well,
and you'd have people on the left be like,
good,
yeah, that's
good
true.
business, the good businessman, right? There is good business people, guys. I mean, it's like that. I had to bring this in there. People have that better talk, but like, It's that episode of the Joe Budden podcast with Mark Lamont Hill, and they were talking about capitalism, right? And like, there's this guy getting so angry. I just don't understand why, if people want to make money, why I gotta be seen as a villain. Like he gets so mad about it, and I'm like, homie, that's not what anyone is talking about. I mean, well, actually, maybe, but at the same token, that's not really what is at core here. But they always have to kind of go back to this, that there is a moral capitalist out there.
Anyway, yeah. All right. So going to the chat. Let's exercise some empathy on this episode. Goonies was my Hoosiers. I appreciate it.
Sorry,
I'm
Steven.
sorry. I had to have my hopes and dreams crushed last week. Yeah, sorry, Eric. This is the sense of adventure is what stuck with me for sure. And I think, especially as kids watching movies like this, like that's really like a lot of it is just like, imagining yourself doing all that stuff. If we mention Reagan again, Dr. Ball might show up and let us know he has seen the Goonies and that Reagan died at his wedding. Yeah, so Terry, appreciate this. I've spent time in both Beaverton and Eugene in the late 90s. I'd never experienced such whiteness, and then I went to Utah. Yeah. I think that's a really good, thing. Like Oregon might be the most white state until you get to Utah, and then like Mormon whiteness is a whole nother
I've only been
layer.
to Portland and I've been to Ashland, Oregon.
Oh yeah. That's right. We've talked about Ashland. Yeah, so I grew up near Medford, near Ashland, but in a rural area outside of those areas. Ashland's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah. Woo! Interesting.
So appreciate this comment from JMP. There's a scene in American Born Chinese where Ke Huy Quan's character talks about this racist depiction, and it's kind of like a critique of his child roles in real life. Another interesting part, I don't know if we mentioned this about his own background, is that he's of Chinese descent, but he is actually from Vietnam, right? His family's from Vietnam. And left in 78, which is a very just kind of interesting timing because it's after the American war of aggression in Vietnam, but right around the time that you get the war with China, the Chinese invasion, really. And that happens in 79. So I don't know if I don't know. I haven't delved into like what are the circumstances around his family, kind of, and I think they go to Hong Kong first, if I remember correctly, and then come to the United States.
I think he was in a camp in Hong Kong, but I can't remember. I saw something about it a long time ago, but I can't remember it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So he's born in Vietnam, but his parents are both Chinese, right? Or they're of Chinese descent. Like, so yeah, there's a whole yeah. He's from Vietnam, though. All right. So this was it. Yeah. So Chunk's head. So I looked this up. So not Chunk. I think we're talking about Sloth here, actually.
Sloth,
not Chunk. Yeah. But so interesting backstory just on that actor. So the actor, he's a former football player. His name is John Matusak.
I totally forgot to mention that.
Yeah, so he was a defensive end. He played for the Houston Oilers. He was the first overall pick in the 1973 NFL draft, so a big deal. That means the first, right? He played with the Raiders, right, for a number of years, and won Super Bowls with the Raiders, actually. And he was also in the 1978 World Strongman competition, placing 9th. I'm reading this all off his Wikipedia page, so this is not stuff that I actually know off the top of my head. But so he plays Sloth, and it is mostly prosthetics that are done, I guess you would call that, I don't know, like latex type stuff. But they do, the eye is robotically controlled or whatever, and so that's why it looks kind of animatronic or whatever. And yeah, but he obviously he looks very different than Sloth looks
Yeah,
as a
like
person.
Google them if you want to. Like, I mean, like it's like, oh wow.
Yeah, I'll pull him up actually really quick. Um, but yeah, anyway, that just as a side note as well, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Is that it's kind of, you know, uh, it's a total fabrication, right? He doesn't look anything like this, and is just, yeah.
Which
So
is like such a thing that's done. Like even if you think about the movie, like in the what's the big celebrated Billy Bob Thornton movie, Sling Blade, they did in like the 90s that he was nominated for an Oscar for, and he's
yeah,
playing this whatever he's supposed to play. It's like a
did he win?
total
He might
like
have won an Oscar for it. Did he? No.
no, I think he lost it. I remember it kind of vividly. It was like a big year because there was like all these independent films were like nominated. He didn't win it, but it launched his career though. Like
He wrote he adapted the screenplay, so he won an Oscar for that,
screenplay,
for Sling Blade.
screenplay, yeah, yeah. But like he plays this, afflicted, quote unquote, and like that's the thing, like this idea to kind of just make up a quote unquote disability, right? And out of like your total imagination. And then like it's seen as like a cool thing, right? Like Billy Bob.
Well,
Yeah.
another movie we have to do soon
Oh,
in the
uh,
Imperial '80s is
Rain
Rain
Man,
Man,
right?
which is also very much a highly, like, obviously it's fictionalized, but like the the sort of version, right, of a savant that they create for that film,
Yeah. And
is not, has
he
no
won
real
an Oscar
basis.
for that.
Yeah.
Dustin Hoffman, and there was a period in acting circles that was seen as like one of the highest achievements in acting for a long time, right? As like a really, and in that kind of era of like the Hoffman mythology, it was like shown as like one of the high achievement points. And there was always like lauded about his developmental process and his creative process. And it's such shit. It's such shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was a big thing in a long, I mean, I feel like actually, I don't know, I always bring in this movie, but Tropic Thunder is like, as I mean, it's totally a messed up movie in a lot of different ways. But I feel like the whole argument that comes forward in Tropic Thunder actually in some ways did maybe push the conversation to, like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Like, maybe we shouldn't be making these kind of movies. Um
I
yeah,
am Sam.
yeah, I am
Sean
Sam.
Penn.
I don't know. All right. Well, appreciate it, everybody. Don't have anything else for today.
Yeah.
I have a few things coming this week, so I'll try to get those up on the schedule, hopefully today. But yeah, so and thanks again to me. And then not sure next week, but we will be back again, and so we'll figure
We'll
that out.
talk. All
Yep.
right, yeah.
All right. All right. Peace, everybody.
Peace.